Gears of War 5, or Gears 5, was supposed to be the Gears game everyone was patiently waiting to see if the Coalition could improve their decent, albeit rocky beginnings. Not counting Gears Ultimate as it's a remake, but Gears of War 4. If you didn't catch my critique of this game, then check it out right here before jumping into this video, then come back here. Don't worry, we'll wait for you. Y'all caught up? Great. Gears of War 4 was the start of the Coalition's work on the Gears franchise, wanting to secure the Gears fans by making sure they stayed true to normal Gears fashion by following similar story beats, and just improving on modes we had already liked like Horde 3.0 while including a couple more modes in multiplayer. However, while the multiplayer felt relatively well to most of the Gears fan base, it was the story, its plot, and the characters that really split the fans up and turned a lot of people off. With a main cast that was really lacking in personality, except for JD to an extent, gameplay that did not move the needle enough to change the typical Gears of War campaign experience, and a story that was one long setup with little substance to hold the rest of the story up, Gears 4 was left with varying criticism once most people had finished the game prior to 2019. After seeing this pendant, the Gears community were left to speculate and build up so much hype coming up to Gears 5, anticipating how the Coalition might move the story forward and how they may shake up the gameplay, if at all, as the only thing they did in 4 was that yank and execution across all gameplay. It was cool, but it did not move the needle very far to really switch it up with Gears, now with it being under new management and in a new trilogy. Rod said they had wanted to do Gears 4 in a way that gained the trust of longtime Gears fans, because generally when a game franchise swaps companies, people are usually upset when the new company implements new changes, one major example being 343 Industries, and we're all very aware of the truly superb job 343 did furthering the Halo series this far. So Gears of War 4 was supposed to be their trial run to prove they could make a Gears of War game, and besides the complaints on the story and its characters, it did still feel like a Gears of War game, just a little shallow. So coming into Gears 5, they said they wanted to break and betray the expectations of longtime fans of the franchise, but enough in a balance to still keep us around with the changes that they make. So that's how I view Gears 5. Gears 4 was their trial game, and Gears 5 is the game they wanted to make the bigger changes and see how the Gears community would react to those changes. And well, the reaction wasn't the greatest, at least certainly not at launch. Gears 5 was yet another addition to the AAA titles being released in such a poor state, so it was not only a disappointment from a longtime Gears head perspective, but also disappointing as we look at Microsoft or Xbox's titles. This will not turn into a console wars discussion, but PlayStation has had hits, even if people have their opinions on some of these games, like not having much progress in between the games, them feeling bloated, or there's 20 different remakes, etc, etc. They still have very successful mainstays of the platform. That is undeniable compared to Xbox. Xbox has managed to bungle every one of its exclusives so hard it's depressing on another level. Halo has fallen off very hard from its glory days, and Gears, while it's been an exclusive forever at Microsoft, and been more so under the radar when this series could have been as big as Halo or even as The Last of Us. Gears 4 should have been the game that propelled us up there, and since 4 didn't do it, I personally was hoping 5 would be able to do this, to show people that Gears is more than just a bloody dude bro shooter. It's got amazing lore, amazing gameplay, great characters, and a beautiful world. However, before it became such a trend of the past 4 years, kind of starting with Cyberpunk 2077, Gears 5 released heavily buggy. Crashes happened all the time. I had so many crashes when I was just playing through the campaign the first time back in 2019, and it took them a while to make these fixes, while some have managed to stay in the game indefinitely as they stopped updating the game just 2 years into its life. Just 2 years. 2 years is how long we had to wait until Cyberpunk got recommended to get back into. They've got Gears 6 and E-Day now, so I'm sure those are factors into why they stopped. And they also mainly work on Unreal Engine 5, so I'm sure their time is very split, especially with how many layoffs we've seen over the past few years. It was just still super disappointing to see. I put so many hours into Gears 4. I was expecting to put the same amount into 5. They honestly could have just copy-pasted 4 onto 5 and I still would have played it. But they made changes. Most of these changes weren't even that bad, just felt severely underdeveloped. Almost like all the recent games we've seen for the past 5 years appearing underdeveloped even if they had good ideas to start with. Almost like they just rushed their games out to grab profits quicker and then say that they'll update after the fact. Nah, that can't be it. They did eventually make some updates later down the road, adding in more cosmetics, game modes, and multiplayer, changing how the awful battle pass system worked, and patched a few things in the campaign so there wouldn't be any crashes, but it feels like they did it a little too late. This will be a commentary and critical analysis of Gears 5. If you're mainly here for the analysis and don't want to sit through a commentary retelling of the story, then you can just jump to it in the chapters below. I do the commentary to add in some dialogue about some smaller details that don't make it to the final analysis or add up to it, or whatever I just wanted to include. It also helps for some people that haven't played the game since its release 5 years ago by now, just to catch up before hearing the analysis, as people may remember things differently from when they played it initially. At least I know I tend to. That are people that have never played the game before. We'll first talk about the music and visuals, followed by the changes to Horde and multiplayer, as well as a new game mode Escape. Then we'll discuss the gameplay and how it feels. Then we'll finally get to the recap and commentary of the story, followed by my analysis of the characters within the story, and then we'll talk about the choice given to us as players. Then we'll get to the amazing Hivebusters DLC, and finally wrap up in the end. After the critique of this game, I will be aiming to answer a couple questions: why we were given that choice at the end, what implications this choice will have for Gears 6, and just what direction the story is moving in for these games. I'll give my own answer at the end of the video. Also, disclaimer, this video will discuss some political things. I know some people don't like that, and this game, hell, the whole series as a whole clearly hits on some political notes. So if you're one of those people that don't like politics in your media for whatever godforsaken reason, well, I'm gonna let you know now. Consider this your trigger warning. Political conversations are okay to have, and I encourage you to have them in the comments, but if you're just gonna be hateful or rude, take that shit somewhere else. And lastly, I play many of the game's cinematics throughout the video. You're free to skip them, but I felt like leaving them in because this game has pretty decent cutscenes, and it sometimes feels better to let them play rather than just describe it really quickly. But if you have your thoughts on it, like you feel like it's too much or whichever, let me know. It won't be like this for every video, but I'm just giving you a heads up. The Gears games have always had scenic vistas and soundtracks that evoke so much emotion in every title. Even in the lesser acclaimed ones, there were at least a couple tracks and a few places in the game where you just have to stop and take it all in. This game may be one of the more visually appealing games on the Xbox's next-gen console. When released on the Xbox One, Gears 5 was at 30 FPS for campaign and 60 for multiplayer. But now for the Series S and X the following year, both are able to reach 60 FPS, with the X being able to reach 120 now, I believe, and on PC. I feel like every area in this game could be a high-quality wallpaper. The overrun foliage in Azura, the cold, icy blue regions of Mount Kadar, the dry red sandy dunes of Vaskar, even the war-torn areas of New Ephyra, not to mention the Hivebusters DLC as well. The lush green forest throughout Pahanu, and the bright orange lava in the volcanic regions, it just all looks so amazing. There's going to be a few wind flare sections in each of the open world regions in Kadar and Vaskar, and they look just incredible. The particle effects and new fog tech that they've integrated look fantastic with these storms. Something I did appreciate about this game was the lack of light in many areas of the game, with Jack being your only source of light now that you don't have flashlights on your chest. I think it was on their chest. When in darker regions, you can't really illuminate that much around you. This just intensifies the creepiness of the darker areas of the game where you should feel a little tense. It can feel like playing Resident Evil, and that intensity always adds to my enjoyment. I actually wish it would happen way more often. You really want to capture the Gears fans again? Bring the horror back. Stop being afraid and adding so much light to these areas where I should feel fear. We've got really strong weapons, and then we also have light. The feeling of danger isn't as strong as it should be. I'm really hoping on E-Day to get that job done in this aspect. The details of characters and their movements in and out of cutscenes has improved quite a bit. It's even more impressive that we've got in-game cutscenes. Even the armor detailing is just spectacular. Everything just looks so crisp and neat. You've also now been given the option to change your field of view. It scrolls from 60 to 100, 60 being the close perspective, similar to Gears 1, with that really close over-the-shoulder gameplay, or being all the way zoomed out, now being able to see your full body and then some. I kind of went back and forth, never really deciding on what field of view I wanted to play with, since I liked both in different areas. Like if it were a darker, more narrow area, then I'd prefer to have a lower field of view and give it more of a Resident Evil vibe. Then when playing in an open world areas, then I had mine at max settings so I could see the world and all of its details. And because I was still trying to take screenshots. We still don't have a photo mode, but at least I could do this. Now the music has certainly improved from the fourth game, and it's still Ramen Djawadi. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Even the different menus all have their own themes, with Kate's theme on the campaign menu being the best. I think this theme captures so many different emotions in one song. It's genuinely the best song on the soundtrack, and I love hearing the different iterations of it throughout the story. And there's of course the use of the older themes and motifs from the older generation, especially when you reach New Hope again. Even just the music in the final moments of the game is just outright beautiful. The music in the DLC is just even more impressive. Most importantly, the lava river fight and the final boss of the DLC. Both of these tracks are just phenomenal. They've done such a great job this time around here. So there's a lot of changes to Horde 4.0 and a new mode called Escape. Before we get to either of those modes, it should be noted, and I just found this out trying to play my own game because I had some lag issues this one time, you cannot play any multiplayer modes offline. Apparently this was the case for Gears 4, but I never came across this issue in that game. So if you decide to bring your console somewhere, you don't have internet, or if you're just playing in the back of a Walmart and you want to play this new Escape mode with 2 other friends, well, you can't at all. If you can't connect to their servers, you just aren't allowed to play. Even if you have the disc like I do for Xbox One, it won't work, which is just extremely frustrating. Everything turns into an online game, so if you want to play the game, no internet or whatever, you don't really have a choice. Sure, most people nowadays have internet, but not everyone, and you don't always have internet everywhere you go. Sometimes you might want to bring the Series S, the more portable console, somewhere where you won't have internet access and might just want to play some Escape or Horde, but nope. So upon release, for some unknown reason, they went back to the Judgment style of things, and where classes were tied specifically to characters. These classes are the same for Horde and Escape, as well as the difficulty levels. So Marcus was a veteran, and Emil, yes, the one from Halo, was a protector, and other characters were also locked to their specific classes that I don't really remember because now they've changed it. This obviously was met with a ton of backlash, so they eventually did change this. It may have been a little too late, however, as I feel many people dropped Gears 5 within the first few months of its life, which was definitely due to a couple other factors that we'll get to later. This generally happens with less popular titles, but Gears 5 was supposed to piggyback off of Gears 4 from a good Horde mode, very good multiplayer content, yet this game dropped off heavily really fast, which was quite unfortunate for the Gears fan base, but not entirely surprising. Instead of using time talking about what the classes were initially, I'll just talk about what they are now, as that's what you'll be interacting with if you decide to go play the game after watching this video. So like I said, I don't remember when they changed the classes from being tied to their specific characters, or even when they added all these new classes, as I don't remember what classes were here initially, besides the couple I have leveled up here, but it doesn't really matter. Let's just talk about how they are today. I wasn't playing this game when they made those changes, so I won't really speak on it, only just talking about my experience since I've gotten back on the game. So there's now 19, yes, 19 classes, split up into 4 categories: assault, tank, support, and promotional. 19 classes just feels like a lot for game modes that only have 5 people at a time, and for escape only 3 people at a time. It does provide many different combinations for a lot of variability, but 19 just felt like a lot. I'm not sure. Some of them even start to have a little overlap as well. Like there's 3 different melee classes. One hits harder with fire, and one hits quickly with blades. Like, why would I play striker when I just rather play brawler? Or there's 2 marksman classes, but one induces fear and one has literal wall hacks. It's a mix of really cool or innovative ones, and then ones that just feel useless or inferior to other similar classes. So a couple, like the demolitions expert, why play that in escape? Why would you launch an artillery strike while inside of a hive? There's then barriers which you can put in front of yourself and provide more cover while standing, or you could use Gibby's dome shield. Neither will stop them from walking up to you and attacking you, but the barrier at least lets you be mobile. So the barrier would be more effective in escape, and the dome would be more effective in Horde most likely. But the dome shield would still feel like a waste of a class to me unless I was planning on being out of cover for an extended period of time. You might as well just play another class that does more damage or more support. And you're also able to play as Jack and use his hijack ability from the campaign, which begs the question, where the hell is beast mode? Anyways, there's a lot to these classes that feel like a mix of mutators and passives and abilities from Horde 3.0. It's cool that they managed to mix all of this in for a varied game experience. It just seems like a few classes can easily get left behind. Alright, let's get to the new addition here, Escape. Escape is you and a team of 2 others willingly getting caught by a snatcher. They wear masks to protect themselves from changing when potted and can still move. Once they get themselves out, they plant this gas on the ground and then they attempt to leave. This was meant to be a shorter or a bite-sized mode as opposed to Horde mode, as Rod Ferguson puts it. The hive you start in will be some facility that will initially appear to be a maze until you eventually reach these decontamination rooms, which then opens to a rest room with some minimal ammo for your squad. A rescue helicopter will come online and tell you that they're on the way and will be waiting for you at the exit, and at that point the doors in front of you will open and it's time to get out through another maze-like area to the exit. But there is a map to help you navigate that will become more clear the more you explore. You and your team technically have an infinite amount of lives for this. If each of you die before reaching decontamination, then you'll start from the initial scene, and the decontamination will act as a checkpoint should your team fall after reaching that point. You'll have an infinite amount of retries, but generally, in my experience, when I first played back when this released, and in this clip you're seeing here, if you're playing with randos, after maybe 3 to 5 retries, they're probably just going to quit the game on you. If anybody makes it to the door and reaches the end, you'll get on a helicopter and it'll show the MVP of the match, kind of like you won a Warzone game. But yes, it is possible to leave your friends behind and just go by yourself. And since release, there have been numerous variations added that you can see here available in your own lobby, and they always have 2 on rotation for matchmaking. People can also build their own hives, I believe, which is really cool from a community standpoint. I don't know how many people did this or still do this to this day, but it's a cool concept. Well, just read that they took out the map builder a couple years ago forever. God, they just love shooting themselves in the foot, don't they? Maybe it'll show up again in Gear 6 in 2055. I do like this mode. It was a cool concept of a game mode, and it feels pretty difficult on its own. It's kind of like just Horde reversed. Not reversed as in you'll be using the Swarm or the Locust, even though we really should have a Beast mode again. I still have no idea why we don't, but more that it's not hunkering down in one large enough area and fending off for what can be many hours. It's a much more fast-paced experience where you're constantly on the move rather than sitting still. It's a very different experience than Horde, even Beast or Overrun, and it's a really cool concept that they came up with. It goes by a little fast if you're on lower difficulties. I did try a higher difficulty, but my level was so low that I was really just hoping my other other two teammates dragged me through it. So if you really want to play the higher difficulties, you'll need to level your classes up a bit. This mode is actually based on the Hivebusters DLC plotline, so it'll make more sense how this escape mode fits in the universe once we talk about that later on in the video. So Horde functions quite the same as it did in a previous Horde. The only difference is now there will be Locust and Lambent sometimes joining the fight, which is pretty cool. And there's also these new energy taps that you can get extra energy from in between waves. But aside from those two things and the class changes, Horde is basically the same as it was in 4. I would argue it was better in Gears 4 just because I like the class system and I found it to be more enjoyable and not as extensive or even restrictive how Gears 5 launched with their character lock. So I don't really have too much to say here. The only other small difference I noticed was being able to upgrade your fortifications without having to upgrade the Fabricator now. That was a little annoying in Gears 4, so I will say that's an improvement here. Nowadays, I typically get bored of Horde since it takes so much time to play. I don't know why. I used to grind Horde so much back in college, but nowadays I just can't really get through it, so I don't want to waste other people's time by quitting the game like other people do a lot. It's like zombies, and I love zombies, and I played for hours when I was younger, but now, if I even manage to survive long enough, my boredom kicks in much quicker. But that's just me. It's still a very fun game mode. The multiplayer. I won't talk too long about this because, again, I didn't play as much in 5. Okay, I lied. There's a lot to say about the multiplayer. Them reducing 5v5 to 4v4 and bringing in free-for-all were two of the most notable things that happened for this game. Now, I never played or even cared to have a free-for-all mode in the game, but I know a very big part of the fan base was really gunning for a free-for-all mode since Judgment, so I was happy to see that they finally added that mode back for the people that wanted it. But the format change. I don't remember anyone at all wanting a format change. I mean, it's Gears 5, not to mention Gears 5 had already released with 5v5 in it. It's not like Overwatch where 5v5 became the reason for the rebrand. No, they changed it to 4v4 after only a few months of 5v5 because the game was apparently too chaotic. It's been 5v5 for over a decade by this point, and now is the time they want to do a format change in multiplayer. This is a smaller yet still very similar issue to Overwatch. The game modes and the maps were both made with 5v5 in mind. They say chaos when every Gears multiplayer game had always been chaotic. Go watch the esports streams of Gears 4 Escalation. It was hectic, and the Gears fan base all loved it. This chaotic feeling must have only been an issue for bringing in new players, and I get there's a balance of trying to bring in new players with changes while maintaining the dedicated players, but changing the format doesn't solve the issue of not retaining new players. I don't know if there were less stomps just because there were 4 instead of 5. I mean, if you're getting stomped by a team of 4, you probably would be stomped by a team of 5 anyway, so what's the point? My only guess is that this was a band-aid attempt of retaining new players and simultaneously realizing that their efforts were failing and numbers were dropping, so to keep the queue time stable enough, they had to drop the required number of people per match. If they wanted to make this change and have it be a new thing for the Gears franchise, they could have just released Gears 5 as 4v4 like Overwatch did. Overwatch still failed in that regard, as we see they're even thinking about bringing back 6v6 at the time of me recording this, but it wouldn't have looked so desperate as doing it in the middle of the game's life cycle. It was just unfortunate. Not to mention they also wanted to copy other live service titles and include a damn battle pass. I think I stopped around Operation 2 or 3 because I just got tired of waiting to be able to use other characters or get other skins and have different emotes. Yeah, I forgot to mention they included emotes and voice lines, which I actually didn't mind, though I saw some other people being upset at this. I don't know, they've got to add more content to drip feed us for money, and having more ways to disrespect your opponent or to do something fun in game is never a downside to me. But back to the battle passes, I just remember the challenges taking so long to complete and not really giving many rewards for playing the game. I love grinding, but those challenges I remember being too long to complete for rewards that just weren't really things people cared for initially. And you used to have to buy everything. What you see now being able to buy with coins, was not always there. Things you didn't own had to be bought with Gears tokens or whatever they were called and only purchased or obtained through the battle pass, and there weren't that many of them. Just your typical corporate greed disrupting the fun of your video games, which is the standard nowadays. They did change a lot of this by this point, so you can get any cosmetic in a game by just earning enough coins for it, thankfully. And I think exclusivity is just dumb in my opinion. The more people that can have something cool that they want to accessorize with in game, it's just better the way I see it. The game modes are practically the same, with a new mode called Gridiron that came out in Operation 3 or 4, which is just some version of Capture the Flag. I think I played it once and stopped caring right around then. I only cared for 2v2 Nashers and Escalation, and with Escalation being changed to 4v4, it just felt weird to play. Not to mention, I still could barely find a match. Most play a team deathmatch, and while that's fun, I tend to prefer objective-based game modes, and for some reason, we have yet to get Wingman back. Would really like to know why, because I love that mode, and I'm sure a whole bunch of other people did too. I'm glad the multiplayer is in a seemingly okay state at the time of recording, but there's no development anymore as of late 2021, just 2 years after release, which is pretty sad standard-wise, but I guess we can only hope that they'll get better with this when they get the E-Day and eventually Gears 6. So for the gameplay, there have been many tweaks, additions, and changes, with one major change change to the gameplay in the campaign where it not only deserves its own section, but also just has so much to it that I think it might change the course of Gears gameplay for campaign in the future. The gameplay in the Gears 5 campaign definitely takes it up a notch with the newly added weapons, added mechanics, mainly from Jack, and a lot of the new enemy types and those open world sections. For Acts 1 and 4, the game is as we've known it to be, a linear shooter with a couple of diverging paths that always converge back to the one main path. But for Acts 2 and 3, the Coalition wanted to expand outside of the comfort zone of Gears and try something new, and this was the open world sections. And I'll get to that in a second, but let's talk about the first new addition to the gameplay, Jack, or initially Dave at the start before he gets cooked. So this Jack is kind of like the one in Gears 3 where he'd go around shocking in combat with you, but now with a slew of upgrades making him a very valuable asset in every exchange you take, and his value only increases the more you play should you choose to implement his gameplay. Baird's been making some adjustments to him to make him more useful in combat rather than just a scout, and it's certainly paid off. He's initially able to fetch weapons for you by aiming at your weapon of choice as long as you can see it. He will then come to your location and drop it. Even if you're moving, he'll keep following you relentlessly to drop it for you. And like I mentioned earlier, instead of you having a flashlight, he'll be your flashlight, making it reliant on him while he has a more narrow beam of light and less light given to the player, meaning that these darker areas are going to be more effective in keeping that spooky vibe, which this game does a decent job at. Throughout the world, there will be these blue and yellow slots where Dave can go R2-D2 some controls. There's also those same colored holes that only he can fit through to open a door or access something you need on the other side. He generally will just hover around you waiting for you to use his abilities and will use his passives over time. He'll normally be in stealth mode unless you have him use one of his abilities or just gets caught, and if so, he can go down. He can't die, but he'll stay down for a period of time if you aren't able to pick him up, although the time he's down for can be upgraded. He's got 7 abilities, 3 assault and 4 support ones, and 4 passives. Now since I played this game already before, you're given the option to start with Jack's abilities that you had unlocked and upgraded before at the point you get Jack from Baird like New Game Plus, but for the sake of this video, I restarted his kit entirely to try and organically look for his parts again and feel the natural progression of the story, especially because some of the later abilities could make some of the earlier fights very trivial. So he's able to have 1 assault and 1 support equipped at the same time that can be changed by either going in the menu for it or quick swapping using the TACCOM button and swapping them out. And a quick swap's a great feature because it allows the flow of combat to keep moving if and when you want to swap abilities mid-combat. Each ability and passive can also be upgraded with components found in the world. Just like The Last of Us, they'll be in all sorts of spots or even safes that Jack will crack open for you automatically. And while they took heavy inspiration from The Last of Us, I think it was very well integrated and I love it. It's what I've said before about looking for collectibles, but with those it was just extra little lore tidbits of your surroundings, which are great, but there's nothing incentivizing you to search for those except learning about the area you're in or going for seriously 2, 3, 4.0, whichever one. But with these components scattered everywhere, the game incentivizes you exploring more, and that's always a good thing. Checking out different paths, looking behind this or that, venturing over to an area you would least expect there to be something. There's so many components to get that they're pretty hard to find them all. In those open world sections, I was searching for a while and I just wasn't able to find them all, despite missing some obvious ones in my face like this one, or even this one here. But just searching even a little bit helps level up Jack's abilities throughout the game. Gears has rewarded you sometimes for venturing in different areas with ammo and collectibles before, and now components are thrown in here too. These components sometimes do make me question the realistic things in this game, like how they can find components for Jack in a facility as old as New Hope, but it's really not that serious. His first ability will already be installed, a pulse to scan the enemies in the area. It'll give you an outline of the enemies near you up to a certain radius for a brief few seconds before going away. Kind of like The Last of Us listening mode, but only for a brief period. If you haven't noticed already, I'm going to be referencing The Last of Us gameplay a few times regarding Jack's abilities and the new mechanics of Gears. I already said in my last video that they sort of dipped their toes in the stealth gameplay territory akin to The Last of Us, but didn't capitalize on those initial aspects in 4. However, here they push a little further into that, and we'll discuss that as we go through more of his abilities. Further illustrating my point, this pulse, when initially shown to the player, is prompted in a stealth way multiple times throughout the opening act in Azura. Although these stealth sections are a little bare bones, at least at the start of the game, because pulse is the only ability you have, and these areas only let you take out a couple enemies before you have to blow your cover, there aren't ways to completely take out the whole area. After coming back from Azura, Baird gives you his next ability to test for free, but the rest will need to be found in the world. This ability he gives you is Flash. It will stun the target or surrounding targets for a brief period of time and leave them standing so you can shoot them from cover. It's meant to get an enemy from camping behind cover or saving your life when an enemy starts getting too close. It's also pretty useful for stunning larger enemies or bosses. Next is the shock trap. Just aim at a spot on the ground, and when enemies get near it, it'll trigger the shock. I never really used this one that often, honestly. Really only found it useful against smaller enemies that could approach you quickly, but but they don't appear too often. Then the last assault ability is Hijack. Jack will connect to any enemy and override them by just flooding their brains with voltage, and he can do this to any enemy. It's nice for overriding a high damaging one like a Pouncer or any Scions that can help you in a fight. Then his support abilities were the Stem, which was a temporary boost in health and armor to eat incoming damage or heal you up quickly if you've taken a lot of damage recently. It's really useful if you want to hold and shoot for a little longer to eat some more damage or to try and predict when you're about to die. I don't think I got creative enough with this one. It feels like there's more applications I probably missed that you can use this for, and I tended to forget that I could use it sometimes. But that goes for almost all the abilities here since it's a new thing to the Gears franchise. Then there was Cloak, which you would imagine you would use this at the start of engagements or some stealth areas, but you could also get pretty aggressive with it too, infiltrating mid-fight behind them like a Spectre or something, assuming you time your cloak just right and find cover, that is, unlike this here. But still, like before, for most sections, you can't complete the entire area through stealth alone, just for taking out a few at the start just to make the fight a bit easier. But taking them out initially does help conserve a lot of ammo for yourself. Then lastly, there was a shield like one of the Guardians. It's nice for not needing to rely on cover, but you still need to be careful since they'll just walk up to you and pass your shield sometimes. I feel like this one was given so late in the game that it didn't provide as much use to me considering how quickly the game moves after the point of unlocking this ability, but that's what a replay is for, I suppose. Each of these abilities also had an extra ultimate upgrade that needed to be found in the open world sections in order to obtain them. These were generally existing tech that Dell adapts to Jack's abilities, which is pretty cool, like an in-game explanation for what and how it applies to each ability. Like the flash ability, there's also a freeze effect you can add that is found from the cooling tech of the grind lifts that you find that were used in Gears 2. But some of these ultimate upgrades just made some fights really trivial. I killed this Warden in just a few seconds using that flash freeze ability and using the pulse ultimate upgrade of adding a 20% damage boost on whoever's pinged by it. The other ultimate upgrades I didn't use too often but could be pretty powerful. The one for the Stem triples your melee damage, so this was useful if they got too close to you, but generally I didn't let that happen anyway, because if they get close enough to you, you'll probably die before they get in melee range, at least on Inconceivable. For shock traps, there's going to be some shock bots that'll chase targets after getting triggered. The cloak, you could actually stay cloaked while shooting. The hijack would explode enemies upon death as long as they were still hijacked when they died. This wouldn't work if the hijack expired, so I didn't get to see this one too often. Or for the shield, that's probably the easiest to miss a little after starting Act 4, before the Brumach in this fight, that explodes the barrier outward upon expiration. Again, this was so close to the end of the game here that I didn't get to use it that often. There's maybe 2 or 3 fights that you get to use this in before the end of the game. You also needed to be close for them for this to work anyways, and I generally just wasn't that close for the majority of my gameplay. It's hard to play aggressively on this difficulty. Maybe in a rerun you'd be able to find more uses for it. Some of Jack's passes were useful, but some I also didn't see a point in upgrading. His core systems I didn't use much since I wasn't getting very many executions. I didn't care for him to be able to pick up heavy weapons for me as I was fine with what I had. And this last one was just expensive for components when I could just use them elsewhere. I just didn't mind waiting too long for my abilities to recharge. His stealth systems didn't matter that much to me at all since he rarely went down, so him being cloaked or being able to cloak quicker never mattered much to me. The most useful of his passives was increasing the damage of his zapper he'd do over time, since that helps with maybe some juvies or leeches or whatever that get close to you. His health passives were also nice since he could revive teammates for you or revive himself quicker in a rare occasion that he went down, and he just had higher health, making it where he just almost never went down anyway. You of course aren't required to upgrade Jack, but you're strongly encouraged to. There are many components you'll find even without trying, and you'll find yourself in fights that will really test your limits when it really seems like having an upgraded Jack to a certain point evens that playing field. This encouragement and feeling of necessity to upgrade will of course increase the higher your difficulty goes, like this section here that sends 2 pouncers on top of you. Without being able to flash, set trackers up, stun myself, this would have been much harder, and even with these abilities it was still an infuriating struggle. So technically the newest weapon we have in Gears 5 is the knife. Yeah, instead of a normal melee attack with the butt of your gun, the knife side of a retro lancer, or the sharp side of a torque bow, your melee attack will now be a knife that they pull out from their side. I think the addition of a knife is cool, but it looks and feels boring in comparison to just beating the fuck out of the thing that's in front of you. That screen shake when you'd melee an enemy made it so you could feel that CT inducing blow you just threw out, and I love that about the older melee. This knife attack loses that brutality because it feels like a Call of Duty knife, which made this a really annoying gimmick in multiplayer. It's made it way easier to take someone down with the melee after getting that 83% on them. And now to use a retro charge or use your chainsaw, you need to hold the reload button. Just from muscle memory, I initially disliked this change, but I adapted to it pretty quickly. I thought I would have to consistently remember which buttons to switch, but it wasn't that big of a change layout wise. The knife was really the more polarizing change here. So for the actual new weapon that you can get your hands on, or forced into your hands as they make you take it.
Launchers, where the hell does Barry find the time? Here, get them while they hot. Yo, I said get them while they hot. This shit's going cold, baby. What the hell? Grab one of these damn guns already!
Is a new grenade launcher lancer, or GL Lancer for short, and this was a great addition to the game. The chainsaw bayonet has been replaced with a grenade launcher by Baird. It's more of a mini seeking missile launcher, as you'll aim down holding the reload button, and once you release where you want to shoot, it'll shoot the mini missiles in the air and then fly over on down on a target that you marked. Kind of like when you'd aim with the mechs for Sam to shoot missiles from the helicopter at the end of 4. This was really useful for mowing down crowds of enemies clustered in one area. The gun also shoots a bit differently than a regular lancer. It feels a little closer to a SMG than a rifle. However, I will say it felt a little wonky shooting these rockets since they tend to scatter a bit, so you may miss your shot if you're aiming at fewer targets, and sometimes releasing a button didn't always launch it. We've also got a new pistol called the Talon. It's an automatic, kind of like the Gorgon from Gears 3. Not much to say about this weapon other than it looks really cool. It's effective, but I would always pick up a Boltok. There's also a new melee weapon called the Breaker Mace that we see early in Act 2. This Lucille with rock candy just feels so fucking cool. It's almost like the Gears version of a gravity hammer. You've got a limited amount of swings, but it does a hell of a lot of damage. Good for just wiping out some juvies. It's got a good lunge to it, so you don't really need to be right up on the one you want to get your Negan on. There's also some pipes later on that had the same functions as a Breaker Mace, and they both share a sick execution too. There were then some cryo cannons found mostly at Kadar, but also a couple times in Vaskar that just freeze. It's fun for a couple seconds until you get shot. They also added a flashbang, which was infamous in multiplayer when this game initially launched. For some reason, I'd never imagined a Gears of War game having flashbangs in it, but I'm surprised there hasn't been one till this point with it being a war game. I think what made this so infamous in the early days was the insane amount of stun where you just couldn't see or even move. In the campaign, I never used them since Jack had his own flash in his kit, and there's plenty of grenades around. Then there's the Claw, a machine gun with those crystals growing on the bottom side of the gun that I thought would make for a really cool melee animation until I remembered that we were giving a knife. You'll have to shoot for a short period of time before the accuracy tightens up, but if you shoot for too long after that, then it will start to malfunction and start spurting bullets erratically instead. However, perfectly reloading this weapon makes it shoot way quicker, and this weapon just feels so powerful and fun to use to mow down somebody. Then lastly, there were the relic weapons that are scattered throughout the open world sections in Acts 2 and 3. They each have their own unique modifiers as opposed to the regular counterparts, and this unique design on them that looks really cool. I actually didn't even know that all main weapons have a relic counterpart. I only found a couple of them in both this playthrough that I'm showing you and the first one I played when this game released, which does add to the dynamic and variable experience of playing through this semi-open world, but we'll get to that a little later. So for the ones that I did find were the relic long shot with a modification that when you get an active reload, you'll have 2 shots to shoot instead of 1 before reloading again, which I definitely needed. The relic torque bow, which was just a torque bow with a lot of ammo but no explosive tips on the arrows themselves, so just high damage and a quicker reload. The relic hammer burst with longer bursts each time you press the trigger for it. The relic Marksa with a full auto when holding down the trigger. And those were all the ones that I found. The area was typically marked with the Omen, but I seem to have just missed many of them in Acts 2 and 3. They're cool to find, but I can't say they really changed the gameplay much for me, nor do they make me want to replay and go back and grab them either. We've got hit registers now, and I personally love it when it lights up with that orange-yellow color when you get headshots. Alright, so there were a lot of new enemies added for this game. Now, they've always had grenadiers with the Nashers and the grenades, but now they're equipped with some armor. Their own bodies would harden, giving them some armor, and they also created a helmet for them to wear. These dudes will literally just walk a slow beeline towards you, tanking all the hits until they're close enough. Adding helmets that actually have a purpose and look sick as fuck was a really good move. Shooting their helmets off will expose them to headshots and will make taking them down much easier than emptying 3 clips into their bodies. Then there's poppers, just such a goofy name. Instead of actual devices like the Locust made for tickers, they just threw some bombs on their chest and called it a day. It'd be effective if they actually moved around more. I don't know, these guys seem to move around less than normal juvies. It's like they lost the ability to dodge. They're not the same as fighting tickers either, which, thank God. Tickers are faster and would generally just run to your side and catch you off guard. These poppers tend to run up and scream at a distance from you before coming in. They're never really difficult to stop from getting close to you. Next were those swarm infected DBs. They're usually in the quieter or more silent areas, just in rest mode, but they come in very large numbers. Their stealth sections are enjoyable. Going through and ripping their batteries out of their backs while having to evade their light is pretty fun and can get pretty scary at times with the settings that they put them in. If you're able to escape their sights for a certain amount of time, they will go back to sleep mode. However, they can surround you quickly, and if close enough can grab and start hitting you to death, but you can be saved like when there's a pouncer on top of you. Then we've got flocks. They'll fly around taking turns to charge up and eventually soar towards you to try and eat you up, where you'll need to struggle to get them off before it eats your face off. Honestly, fighting these things stress me out because you've got to watch for when they charge the vortex up and charge at you, because then these little leeches will break off and crawl towards you to explode on you. So if you're not paying attention, they will get the drop on you. But it does look really cool when they do that vortex and charge at you because they all light up right before they do that, and it makes it very easy to dodge out of the way. These leeches will even come from off screen sometimes, and you won't always hear them since these sections are usually pretty loud, so that'll get pretty annoying. So it's best to usually hang in a corner for these sections. Then we've got stumps, the corrupted DR1s. They'll generally stay put and just fire at you with whatever the DR1 had in its hand, but the way these things look is just so grotesque. They also start to send some leeches at you as you chip away at them, which got to be a little annoying because like with the flocks, sometimes you wouldn't see or hear them coming, so after a few deaths you just gotta remember that they could be coming at any moment, or to watch their feet as they crawl underneath them, which would certainly keep me on my toes even if it was frustrating. There were also hunters with torque bows and boltox. Nothing really much about them other than their cool designs with their leather hats. And then finally those wardens that use those breaker maces that we talked about. They'll charge at you many times for some crazy leap slams or just try swiping at you, but they're generally slow enough for you to run away and keep them at a distance. They have those helmets just like the grenadiers, so you should know by the time you first face a warden that shooting the helmet will help kill these guys faster, especially because they've got crystals all over their bodies, making them immune to most damage. And I know this is a Gears game and not The Last of Us like I keep mentioning, but wouldn't it be cool if we had a dodge mechanic? Like an actual dodge, not the roll that you get, because you'll still get hit mid-roll. It's normally for avoiding bigger and slower incoming damage. I'm just imagining being able to quick dodge these quicker swipes that the warden or a reject does, or being able to sidestep and melee them back. I guess it would be another thing that they'd copy from The Last of Us, but it would be pretty cool for like 3 uses it would have in this game. However, I don't know what button it would be since they all seem to be occupied. So there's also some newer mechanics that were added that didn't necessarily fit with the rest that I just talked about, so I'll just address them here. They added in health bars for bigger enemies, and this felt a little handholdy to me. It's not something I cared much about in these games, and shooting relentlessly at a boss without knowing when it would die added to the realism and feeling of accomplishment when you finally took it down. I just don't think these were really needed. But I don't know, maybe others liked its inclusion. It's just my opinion. There's going to be a couple times throughout the game, like at the start, where Baird gives you an option of reinforcements, like DR1s or Guardians that he'll deploy for you. The choice doesn't change much, but it was cool to see. These won't be the only times that you're given a choice in this game. There's also now explosive ordnance that'll just give you ammo for explosives. It'll restock your grenades and whatever explosive weapons you had on hand. In addition to those Last of Us-esque inclusions, there's now viewable things in the world that you can interact with and look at, and someone will say something about whatever you're looking at, like in this opening section in Baird's office. I like this because it not only gets more dialogue out of the characters, but also lets us interact with the world more than just seeing the things that are in front of us. There are also some environmental aspects that affect combat throughout the campaign and make the gameplay experience just a little more engaging than what 4 had, like these steam vents in the Outsider camp in Act 2, or each of the Wind Flare sections in both Acts 2 and 3. Now let's get into the biggest and arguably most controversial change ever made in Gears of War. There were 2 open world areas that you'll progress through: the mountainous region at Mount Kadar and the red sandy dunes of Vasgar. The way for traversal was using the skiff. It uses the wind to propel you in your direction of choice, and its steering feels really smooth. It's pretty fun to ride around with in these areas, and I'm glad it wasn't just used to ride around areas. There was that part here in Vasgar where you needed to ride through 2 wind flares while also being on a clock racing against a train. It was really fun having to drive through the storm because it was an actual challenge using the mechanic of the skiff. It was pretty engaging to ride through, even if I got sick of getting sent to the land of Oz. So the downside: these skiffs can also store weapons on the sides of the skiff, which was super useful, like having a weapons locker. Well, it would have been super useful if the weapons didn't disappear for me every time I stored a weapon on it. So every time you lead the skiff into a point of interest and in return, your weapons would just disappear. I initially stored my long shot relic on it, and when I got back, it was just gone. So I had to resort to just using this as a way to move weapons between inventories before engaging in any fight or any area of interest, otherwise I'd lose those weapons. This was super frustrating because I had a whole game plan around using weapons for different encounters so I could get a chance to use more weapons than just 2. Luckily in Act 3, JD and Foz are there, so they acted as my weapons lockers. But even then, they'll just switch out their guns when they waste all the ammo, so there's still a chance I would lose them. And this issue with weapons disappearing has been an issue since the game released. I've seen so many people say the same thing. I even had the same issues when I first played. I just somehow forgot when I came back to play again. It's been nearly 5 years and this is still an issue. It's sad because it's also a really easy issue to fix. I know they stopped working on this game 2 years after the game released, but come on, they could have at least fixed this small bug by now. But alright, on to the worlds themselves. You'll have a map for each of the open worlds that will first be shadowy, as you'll need need to discover more of the area, and the more you explore, it will start adding more POIs to your map with a given dot for smaller points and a question mark on ones that you pass by but haven't been to yet. Then the main POIs that will progress the story will be shown with a star. Once you've finished at these designated areas, it'll show a check mark on them indicating you've done everything that you needed to do there. These areas will also have a flag located perfectly right outside for you to see that there's something to venture into here. There are many side areas in both of these open world sections that will certainly fill up your gameplay time if you care to go through or search through them. Most of the areas were just used to give Jack more components and abilities to add and upgrade or find those relic weapons. And to make sure they weren't just areas to walk in and grab some metal, they always give you a fight to deal with, whether it's a slew of swarm randomly running up on you, a carrier, a warden outpost, some rejects scattered around, you name it. Mixed in with these areas though were also those small side missions you could engage in, like finding out what happened to Lena, Freddy, and Norsko, this small group of outsiders you hear being talked about back at the outsider camp earlier in Act 2, or helping out the nomads of Paddock's camp, like getting their water secured or saving some of them from being held up by the swarm. It gave these side areas and the open world as a whole just a little bit more depth than just being a vast area to ride around, even though they still are just big open areas. Outside of looking for those relic weapons, there isn't really anything else to find in these open world sections, to where if you spent a decent amount of time searching just to find some relic weapons and maybe a couple Jack components that you probably weren't going to need anyway, then you probably got bored much quicker with the game. I did find the gameplay for Gears 5 to be a bit more enjoyable than Gears 4. Even if the open world sections didn't have too much to offer, it was still an okay experience. It doesn't try too hard to break out of the Gears formula, but unfortunately just didn't have enough going for it. But I did really like the inclusion of Jack. He gave a bit of an RPG feel to the game that's really new for Gears of War. It makes me question where they're going to go for Gears 6. But what really makes me question how they're going to get to Gears 6 is the story. So let's talk about it. So we start with this really long but awesome cinematic that looks like the crystallization process of the swarm and its takeover. It looks so grotesque and honestly horrifying, and we eventually see Kate in this pool of blood, and she eventually wakes up from what looks like a dream. They've come back to Azura to attempt to recalibrate the Hammer of Dawn to aid in the fight against the growing swarm threat. This is all against Jen's wishes, however, as she doesn't know that they're actually here doing this right now. So there's been a bit of a time skip between 4 and 5, and if you haven't read the books or know what happens in between, you're now hearing that JD, Del, Kate, and Marcus have now paired up with the COG. They seemingly report directly to Jen and have Baird acting as their version of control here. So Kate's been having these nightmares and headaches for some time, and it seems Marcus has been trying to help her through it, but judging by the way she looks at this locust side of the pendant, I don't think they know yet. I guess she's scared of how anyone may react, but I mean, she could trust these three at least, right? As long as she doesn't kill herself first. As you come up to some of the swarm as they've been trying to colonize Azura in the absence of humans, you see some of the drones even giving commands to younger looking drones known as Imagos. I don't know how to pronounce that word. I don't think I've heard anybody say it before, but that's the name that they use for the newborn drones. I find it interesting that there's some kind of a chain of command here. They seem to be evolving more than how we saw them in 4. So they activate the missile, but the doors don't open all the way. So Marcus decides it's time to leave so they don't actually die here, and JD insists that they should open the silo door since they came all this way. So again, he and Marcus will clash in how they want to proceed when met with a problem. Marcus moves to make sure they preserve their lives at all costs, and JD will want to get the job done no matter the cost. They get cut off by Swarm, and JD and Del split off to go attempt to manually open the doors anyways. They're actually able to open the blast doors and escape just in time from the launch, and so does Dave, but he gets cooked. So again, remember what I said last video if you watched it. JD succeeds in trying to prove that he can get things done, but it almost cost them their lives, and Marcus is rightfully upset about this, but holds his tongue for now. While Marcus says it wasn't necessary to take the risk like he did, and I want to agree with Marcus, what other option did they have here? If the missile blows into the silo doors, then wouldn't the whole place have imploded? They were stopped by Swarm for a little bit, so it's not entirely certain that they would have made it out in time without blocking that missile, and they wouldn't have progressed further in recalibrating the hammer. Kate butts in between the dad-son argument and says he only cares about you, and JD barks back saying you would know, wouldn't you? And she says that this was shitty. How? Until I read the books, because there's one that leads directly into 5. As far as we know, it looks like Marcus has been spending a lot of time with Kate since the end of 4, which would already mean more time spent with her than his own son. JD is perfectly within reason to feel the way he does about his dad spending most of his time with his friend rather than himself. I mean, I think anybody would be upset in his position. It's understandable why he's attending to Kate so much, at least I think so. He can relate with the nightmares and loss, but I don't know if Kate has ever even shown the other side of that amulet to anybody yet, so other than what I stated, I'm not sure why he can't talk to his son just a little more. They meet Baird again, and he's had some time to really innovate since being out of combat, and his office looks sick. He's even got his own Jarvis named Iris, and she's amazing.
Thanks a lot, Iris.
Your vocal sentiment does not match your words' literal meaning. Thus, you are not actually thanking
Please stop
me.
talking. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a bazillion 40-year-old satellites to find.
Damon, there are only 15 missing satellites.
Thank you, Iris. More sarcasm to add to your growing library.
Before we begin, Damon, the combat module you brilliantly designed is now ready. My use of brilliantly was intended to be sarcastic. Did I succeed?
Follow me.
So on a side note, if you find this report, you can read that when Marcus got potted in 4, it actually did almost kill him. If they got there an hour later, he'd be dead. And he did actually have some bad side effects. His digestive system and his face were damaged, but he made a full recovery anyway. I guess that's Marcus for you. That man will not die. Like I mentioned in the gameplay section, you can tell that Rod Ferguson took a lot of inspiration from Neil Druckmann because there's so many aspects of The Last of Us around here that we've never really seen in a Gears game before. Not that I mind, at least in this case, I like being able to walk around and observe or interact with certain things and have the characters speak a little more. That's something the Naughty Dog games do very well, characterizing their characters through their respective worlds. Ferguson even says he admires Neil Druckmann the most as a creator. It could be better, like instead of JD just talking to himself, he could be like, yo, Baird, what the fuck have you been eating in here? And Baird would respond with more distaste for Jin or for sticking him in here in the first place. So after hanging with Uncle Baird, they head over to the gym to get some new components for Jack, and we get to meet Foz. And this man has got some issues.
Hey, Foz. How's life in Jin's rear echelon treating you?
Brilliant. But then we can't all be off on some secret mission. Oh, yeah? How'd you hear about that? This is an army, not a monastery.
Yeah, okay. Well, look, we'll just leave you to the very important work of punching machines.
And sparring. Hang on a second, shitstick.
Shit stick. Del, theories?
I don't know. Maybe a stick made out of shit?
Or a stick used to stir up shit.
All right, fuck off. How about we make this interesting? You and me spar right now.
And how exactly is beating you interesting?
Yes or no?
You want in on this?
Pretty sure what's actually being measured here is gonna leave me at a distinct disadvantage. Then again, maybe not.
Hilarious. Are you in or not?
Oh, I'm in.
How's that fun working out for you?
Try it again, Foz. Come on. Hey, here's the thing, Foz. About to spar with you, but not beat you. It's against their programming, but explains your false confidence. Quite a bit, actually.
Want some advice, Phoenix?
Nah, I'm good.
Jin does love her golden boys. But never for very long.
See, that was fun.
Fuck off.
We see that Foz was expelled from training. Yeah, this man's definitely got some issues. Marcus is talking to Jin about the hammer, and she's adamant about it not being used and says that Anya agreed that it should not be turned back on as well. It makes sense. Anya was definitely still feeling guilty about the initial strikes. Her bringing up Anya obviously upsets Marcus, and we discover the reason for her death was an attempt for a second childbirth. See, if JD had said anything about that back in 4 about his mom, or even acting a little off in a maternity ward in the 4th game, that would have given us a little more context, and coming to this realization now would add so much more to his character. But all he said was that they need to repopulate. If his mom died in the mission for repopulation, I'm surprised he didn't feel a type of way about this baby propaganda or express it even a little bit. It makes me think they either didn't think this far ahead or just forgot about it when writing JD for the 4th game. Maybe it's a little bit of propaganda brainwashing him into thinking she died for a good cause, but then where would his anger come from besides Marcus not being around? However, she inspired many women to then have kids afterwards, but Marcus doesn't see it that way, and only another loss for him. This is also how we find out that Jin herself is pregnant with who we don't know, could also be a donor, because I don't even think she has time for a relationship seeing as she's the first minister. Although, will she have the time to raise a child? I guess a question like that would matter more if they weren't at war and only trying to keep the human race alive. The only objective now for her must be to make sure that they have as many humans as possible. The rest walk in and Jin is still adamant about not turning on the hammer, but they get interrupted by Clayton saying that they need help because they're getting attacked at Settlement 2, a name that should be ringing some bells right now. While flying over in the helicopter, JD tells Kate and Marcus to protect the main gate.
Main gate. Keep anything else from getting inside.
You realize I'm the ranking officer here, right?
And we'll reinforce.
And Del reflects for a little bit about being back, and Foz says to get over it. They did their job, and JD breaks them up. So Foz was also there that day, yet we still don't know what happened here. But he clearly holds a different sentiment than Del does. Almost get shot by one of your own that's helping guard some civilians from the invasion, and they got fucked up. Also, thank God we weren't Swarm, because he's certainly not saving anybody with aim like this, dog. Oh my God.
Control, need backup. A smasher
Fuck it. Never mind, Control. I took care of it. DBs, we gotta secure this street.
Oh yeah, I like her. Finish helping this Carmine, now you gotta go help the original Carmine. Well, I guess not the original, the third one, you know what I mean. Del sees a graffitied memorial and Foz makes light of it yet again. So we learn a little more here that innocent people were killed in some way, but not too innocent, Foz thinks, since they were throwing firebombs, and JD decides to break them up again. But Cole asks a little further, with Del replying saying his DBs were under control, and Foz says that they identified an insurgency and eliminated it. He doesn't even refer to the protesters as people, and then says that every herd needs a good culling. Yeah, this man's a villain, what the fuck?
I know who I'll call from this herd.
I wish he had his own thoughts on the situation instead of just making light of it on Foz. It seems like he would have sided with Del here, but I would have hoped to hear more of what he thought of this Settlement 2 situation, like how Oscar made his own thoughts known. Instead, Cole chooses to let them argue amongst themselves when he's the veteran here. Also interesting, the DBs weren't fit for combat at all, but were wielding weapons that dealt death apparently, when before they only had extreme tasers. I also wanted to mention I find it odd that Snatchers are invading them here when I feel like their main purpose is for stealing people to grow more numbers, but them getting deployed here kind of puts them at risk. But maybe they've got them outnumbered so much it doesn't matter and they just want to steal as many humans as possible. I know the juice here slaps.
Get all that juice.
You finally get to the plaza where Carmine's held up and you get to use Baird's new toys. They start hopping over these walls over here, and it's a small detail, but it's cool because they don't just attack from the main areas that you're allowed to walk through. It just caught me off a little bit.
No personal items, no luggage.
What, are you deaf? No personal items.
Yeah, this man Foz is an asshole, and they all just sit here and watch them do it. I don't know why. We're seeing a lot of how Foz is sort of a fascist that has a hate boner for people or citizens that don't listen to authority. He clearly has a complex going on that Del just doesn't seem to vibe with. We get to see the grub killer in the flesh, and he doesn't look a day older, but he sure sounds like it. Him and Lizzie get to reunite, and holy shit, these things swoop in and tear this man apart and attach to the DBs. They're kind of like the Krill, but they don't need darkness, so that's even more fucked. We've been coming across a lot of mangled bodies, and it's been extremely grim, and I'm loving it. This attack is proving to be extremely devastating to these guys here, and it's showing. You come up to some more DBs, and they've been overridden by the swarm's flock, and they start to turn on you. Just like we saw with that weird override in Gears 4, this is the result. They start to turn against the humans and become puppets of the swarm instead. I'm sorry, but I don't know how the humans are going to get out of this. They're fucked. Like, this is actual insanity because now all the forces you created to help you now turn against you in a flash. And now what the DBs say when they get turned is a little terrifying. So Jace was an actor here at this theater, which is really cool to see. They run into another swarm-infested robot, this time a DR-1 on the stage, and it's wiped out all of the evacuees from this area that are all just dead in the seats behind it. This is ominous and honestly really dark. However, on a lighter note, I do love this fight. The spinning and the music playing in the background for this part was just super fun. The song that plays here just sounds really familiar, but I just can't remember what it is for the life of me.
Here they come.
It's a remix of the Stevie Wonder song, Sir Duke. I knew I remembered it from somewhere, but anyways, that was going to kill me if I never figured that out. The settlement is actually fucked. Baird's saying that the evacuation's over, but they're all the way on the opposite side of town, and JD suggests using the hammer, but Baird can't aim it at all, so he denies it. Lizzie says she'll come to pick them up since she's nearby, and we hear Cole and Foz beneath, and they bring a party on over. Cole leaves mid-fight, saying he'll be back, and Jesus, I know this had to give Marcus some PTSD here. Kate uses the same lines she said before in Gears 4, talk about reusing assets.
And now we've got drones! And now we've got drones!
Also be warned, the cars in this section can combust. Wasn't expecting that. I didn't think this was GTA. Cole rides a grenade-strapped motorcycle into its mouth, and then you gotta shoot it for some reason. I thought it would just go off, but I guess not. Transition to a gruesome scene, and we finally learn the truth of Settlement 2.
So, Del, see any friendly faces you recognize? Maybe that's the peaceful protester who broke my nose.
You deserve worse than a broken nose.
Why don't you show me what I deserve?
Stop! Enough of this shit!
You're a goddamn coward!
A coward? Wow. Well, have I got news for you?
Foz.
Don't.
Guess who ordered the first shot, Del? Directly into those peaceful protesters of yours. Yeah, that's right. Lieutenant Pedigree there.
Guys. Come on, guys. Look, I mean, they were throwing incendiary... The whole thing was confusing, all right? I didn't mean to have it happen. Never mind.
Cavalry's here!
Look, we can discuss this later. Come on.
So first, I don't get why Foz even rats JD out here, because it's not even what they were arguing about initially. Foz was just making fun of some fucking dead civilians, like this dude is just diabolical. Second, I also don't get why these guys can't see that that might have been a hard situation and decision for JD to make at the time. Yeah, he may have made the wrong decision, and yeah, those people were just protesting, probably against the fact that they were held against their will by the COG, but if they were holding incendiaries and what JD was like roughly 24 at the time, I can hardly blame him for making such a quick and rash decision like that. He should have certainly come clean about his involvement sooner, but they frame it like he's a shitty person like Foz here, and that's so far from it. I can understand them being upset with him withholding this information though, although I still don't know how Marcus came to find this out, or even Foz, but it somehow eluded Del this entire time. JD seemed like he wanted nothing to do with his dad in 4, so I wonder when he had the time to tell him and not have Del find out. And how would Del believe that the DBs just malfunctioned and never looked further into it than that? Him, the science geek of the group, just accepted a fault in the DBs as the reason for mass casualties? I'm just surprised he didn't ever think to look into it even a little bit. The more I ask about this Settlement 2 situation, the more contrived it feels in order to split JD from Del and Kate, but we'll explore that a little more as we get further along. The convoy gets cut off by Swarm, and JD feels again that they have no other option besides the hammer in order to save Lizzie and the convoy, so he just dives into the deep end with no one shooting at him, like, okay, using himself as a beacon for the hammer.
Told you it'd work. Barrett! Barrett! What's going on?
Can't control it. Iris, shut it down! Shut it down! God damn it! Just run!
It worked in his favor, but it blew right back in his face and had a far more devastating consequence. Now he's responsible for Lizzie's and these other people's deaths. That's a horrible way to go too. Another Carmine death in the books, but this time as a consequence of someone else's actions. At least this Carmine was cool, had a good introduction, and was a well-liked person, but just met a grisly fate thanks to JD. And I was really hoping she'd make it too. I guess it's only Clayton still. Fast forward 4 months later, and it's just Kate and Del after baiting us thinking JD's on the helicopter, but it's just Jack, and they're at a place you might find familiar soon. These outsiders here have pouncers up on pikes out front. I wonder if this actually works. I mean, I doubt it. They seem to know who she is, but they make them give their weapons over. They're referring to some guy as someone who we know, and we can infer who it is, but we'll see when we get there. They've been trying to convert outsiders over to the COG and have apparently had success, but these guys don't seem like they're willing to budge. Walking through this area kind of reminds me of walking through the stranded camps in Gears 1 and Gears 3.
Want a whiff of this? Stinks almost as bad as you. Wasn't that funny?
If you walk around enough, you get to hear all sorts of dialogue from these people, even dialogue from Kate and Del, and this goes for each of the walking sections in this game. There's a lot of dialogue you could potentially miss if you just don't walk in certain areas for the interaction to prompt. My first playthrough, I don't think I walked around nearly enough because I seem to have missed a lot of the smaller dialogue around here. It works to give these characters more life to them. It lets us know they actually think and aren't just existing here. It's an issue I had with the fourth game, and this is an improvement on that part. It's just some random conversations like a doctor that has no animations for some odd reason checking on a patient that has a low amount of health supplies, or the head of security talking shit about the head of the camp because they're running out of people to protect the camp, or a group contemplating the difference in their lives from here and potentially being in the walls with this dude not being able to score a threesome.
Sounds fun.
Forget what I was saying. Would much rather die alone.
There's some weird, crazy conspiracy theorists, and then a dude that really likes his plants.
A blanket of moist earth, cozy little pod, cold, fresh water. All you need. I love you. I love you. You are my babies and I love you.
There's more than that, but I'm not going to go over every conversation. Basically, there's enough people talking and things to discover while walking around in this area that it added almost an extra hour of playtime just walking around. You can also find a special someone's COG helmet. Why the outsiders just let it sit here is a little off-putting. I'm surprised it wasn't somewhere else, but it is Ben Carmine's, confirming that this is the Riftworm that we took down in Gears 2. We finally see Chuz again, so we know who the village chief is by now. If you walk around enough and find a mandate, it seems the chief here is running the place similarly to the COG. They're not allowed to leave anymore, and they get conscripted to fight against their own will if they start losing too many people. She gets another headache, but because we're playing as her now, we see a vision, which could be similar to what she may have been seeing in her head when she had those headaches before. Finally get to meet the village chief, and it's our man Oscar. This man looks like he's seen some shit. Many COG have been here to try and convince him to join the COG in a fight, but he's yet to budge, and despite Kate pleading this time and the fact that they get attacked every single day, he still denies to join despite being literally the last village that hasn't joined yet. They then get attacked by these new enemies wielding torque bows with some pretty cool hats. Grab this new shock trap module for Jack to help Oscar kill the juvies right outside the door. I don't know why these dudes were just right here ahead of us and didn't want to turn around and help us. A stump has even showed up here, and these dudes get blown to bits. So we haven't been in this camp for too long. How did all these swarm get here so quickly, including the stumps? Stumps don't move very fast, and like they don't get deployed on anything, so how did they get here so fast?
Like a swarm.
I guess it doesn't matter. Get your hands on the silverback they were working on earlier. Foz eventually comes in with an evac convoy outside the gates, but right at the door, Kate gets snatched up and the queen starts talking to her. You start taking control of various swarm monsters against your will. First a juvie, then a drone, and then a mulching scion, and then finally a new enemy with these two giant rock candy maces. You're able to kill both civilians and swarm alike, which I think is a very neat touch as it doesn't force you to kill either one. Kate loses control and Oscar gets murdered by the one she's controlling, but I found it interesting she had control up until this point and lost it when it came to Oscar. Could she have turned away when she did have control? Would she have been forced to go through and kill otherwise? Or was she really forced here the entire time? And all of this section here makes me wonder again, where the hell is beast mode? Her being captured in this snatcher was connecting her to the swarm hive mind, but how does it explain the premonition vision she had prior to this happening? Would this have happened regardless? Has she had a vision that spells the future like this before? And like that, the character we were all rooting for to come back dies just within the first couple hours of the game. I expected him to die because this scene was one of the initial trailers that came out for the game, and we knew he survived at the end of 4. I just didn't want him to die so fast. JD shows up with a really cool cast on his arm that seems to be helping with those burns he got from the hammer. A very new look and a newer sense of duty as he rushes Kate to get over it so that they can leave. She refuses and finally fesses up, revealing her dreams and nightmares may have been messages, so these visions are what she's been seeing when she has these headaches. And this confirms for me this is the first time she's shown them this side of the amulet. JD says we need to leave anyways because there's orders, but they ignore him as Marcus tells her there's a place up north that they could go check out. She essentially tells JD to fuck off.
Correct order.
Well, Captain, screw your order. This isn't about you, it's about me.
But he warns Del that he should watch out for her since that's the locust symbol and she may not have a choice in her own actions, and Del is just like, okay. He's not in the least bit alarmed that her grandmother had a locust symbol as an heirloom and her mom was held captive in a specifically different way than any other human before. I'd be freaking out around her. Just Del and Kate go, and Marcus chooses to stay on comms with them as they take this nifty skiff for traveling and tells them that their destination is a facility called New Hope, which you should recognize from Gears of War 2. So Del does point out that she told them the secret and JD didn't. I guess that's fair, but she only told them after somebody died, and her realizing she was connected to the swarm and still didn't tell the full truth. She's still withholding here too, but let's get mad at JD. They're just two very different situations here, but let's keep moving. Following the point I made about them taking notes from Naughty Dog, if you played those games or seen videos about them on YouTube, then you'd know that characterizing their main protagonists are by pairing them up with at least just one person and have them talk to each other throughout the course of the game, and not just one-off jokes or waiting for cutscenes. They try and do that a lot here with Del and Kate in this act. They're out here by themselves, so they've only got each other to talk to, and they talk very frequently. Each time you enter or get near a point of interest before and or after encounters, or even just drifting around on a skiff, and depending on how much you did in these areas, you could probably miss some dialogue. Even outside the skiffs, they talk much more frequently in this game than in 4, and it does help a lot. If you saw my last video, then you know that my main issue was that they didn't talk to each other nearly enough outside of just making jokes. They initially get hit with a wall made by the cog, which must have been recent given the new insignia here. They start talking about JD and how different he's been, and they honestly vilify him in pretty much every conversation they bring up about him while being here. They come up to another wall, but this time with a clearance that Jack can't bypass, so they've got to go for now. They come up on some notes in a camp from Lena that's with Norsko, and by the looks of it, a late Freddy, the outsiders that we heard about earlier. She has another vision, doesn't say anything about it. Good lord, these wind flares are horrifying. It's hail, but ice is giant as a bus. Could you imagine this falling on you? Once they get inside, some Gears 2 music starts playing, and it's so nostalgic. I just love it. It's a good touch if you've played the other games.
Bathroom. Check the other one.
Find the door that Marcus blew up, and then he directs you to find some stasis tanks right outside, but there's a new guy waiting for us here, who just ignores bullets unless you get close to him. It's the same type of guy we saw at Oscar's camp, called Wardens, with those giant maces with those crystals on them and a helmet. These dudes are just menacing as fuck, and they may be my favorite design-wise with the helmet, and their crystallized armor and just that cape. But I love all capes. Any design with a cape is an instant favorite for me. The Warden being present means that the Swarm are attempting to start another hive in this location. I wonder what the Warden's role is in that, or how hives are even created in the first place. I guess that's in the books. I might end up making a book counter for how many times I have to question things like this. We're back in a New Hope facility, and this place has just gotten even spookier. The cogs still have frequented here even after the war, and now those DBs that were stationed here have all been corrupted, so they're now just sitting here, and it's creepy seeing them all in a pulse. Del dies on me again. Man, this dude ain't dying. You're now in some prison cells we never saw as Marcus, as he explains what they learned to Kate. For those who didn't play the second one or haven't played the 5th one yet, the scientists here experimented on the children of emulsion poison miners. Pretty fucked up. Get into a really creepy room. It looks like Eleven's room in here. Hit the switch and Niles picks right back up from where he left off.
Will we listen? Did you listen? Are you listening?
That's Niles, all right. Still batshit after all these years.
Jack, get over here and pull whatever files you can.
Oh, hello, naughty fellow.
Hey, is Jack gonna get some weird virus plugged into this thing?
I don't know. Just hose him down when you're done.
Oh, shit.
Final cleansing. Has it begun? May I terminate?
No! Get it! Come on!
As someone once said to me, nighty-night.
They make it out, and with the data from earlier, Beard found out that a message came from Mount Kadar. Del figures they can trace the message's signal through whatever comm towers are in the area, and that's what you're going to be doing next. The comm towers are behind the giant gate from before, but luckily Jack pulled a code from the data he got from New Hope. Gotta love convenience. The gate is feeling shy, so we get in there, override it ourselves, and the world opens up with more to discover. Find out at the Ice Lake and many other areas around here, there's also now corrupted guardians that will deploy a now unbreakable shield in front of whichever swarm they can. I don't know, man. You guys might really be fucked here against a swarm. This would piss me off if I were in their world with all the bullshit they keep having to deal with. Find out more about Lena and Norsko. Another vision occurs. Del finally questions what I was questioning last video, that maybe these swarm could still have some human left in them, but Kate strongly disagrees. They find some phosphorus fuel that could explode if someone just coughed on it, and figure it could be useful for something later. I like that the dialogue reflects what you've done by this point, because it would be different if you had already gotten to the point where you would actually need this phosphorus fuel. But carrying this thing out of here might have been one of the most stressful missions missions in the game. Jack needs to carry it, so of course this turns into an escort mission because he can't cloak while carrying this thing. And escort missions have always been fun. They liken JD to outsiders that don't want to be found or saved. When did JD become someone so far from saving? What has he done to even warrant needing to be saved? Yeah, he didn't tell these guys that he decided to shoot those protesters, but I don't think that was so bad that he's turned to the dark side like they're making him out to be. You find Lena frozen solid at a substation and some codes for another nearby substation. Inside one of those stations, she has another vision, this time of the conversation from earlier, but her mind makes it seem like they're out to get her. Use it to trace the signal to the lab, and you're also able to find signals of other POIs that you can visit in the area, which is pretty neat. Find that the signal still needs the other tower to get the final spot located. Now at the other tower, we find a note from Lena. After finding her frozen, we now see Norsko got potted and we had to take care of it. A grim fate for the both of them, although weird he got potted just in here alone instead of taken somewhere else. I guess it doesn't matter, they'll just pod anybody anywhere nowadays, huh? Like, why is there a random pod inside of here? And don't snatchers do the podding? Like, how did it fit in here in the first place? And again, why only one? I thought they pod multiple people in central locations. Kate doesn't know how her parents met, why her mom had the amulet, or who her grandfather was, other than the fact that he wasn't a good person. She has another vision, still doesn't tell Del anything about it. Gave me a little PTSD here. Now with the signal they found, they head to the location, but it's underground. But we've already got the phosphorus, and if you didn't have it by this point, then you would have to go to that side area before continuing. At which point the game will tell you that this is a point of no return. I don't know why they thought standing here on the ice was a good idea, but they make it in just fine, as usual with Gears.
Radio tower.
I get it. Voices again in her head leading to a vision, this time with Mira, but how'd she know this was Mira? I mean, I would like to assume she should know who the former Locust Queen was, but find a helmet of a miner who was shot just for knowing about the area. It's rough, man. And you find another door needing proper identification again. Kate's blood works here, and Niles greets her home. Niles also recognizes he has a split construct over at New Hope and ensures he's different and begins giving you each a tour. Apparently, these cryojets had some faults that froze the whole area.
Shit!
I would not do that again if I were you.
Disable the generator powering them and find a lot of older COG soldiers with retro, so clearly a long time ago. Too bad none of them here are the Avatar. About to drop a lot of exposition coming up, so hope you're ready. There's some more tanks here, while Niles explains that they were initially for curing children with Rustlong, but he got a little twisted in his direction, coming out here after being shut down to continue his own work.
The COG wanted medicine. I gave them gods. Oh well. Water under the bridge.
Seeing that these people were fighting and trying to escape from something is just eerie. There's a lot of failed experiments just sitting here, but they apparently made a breakthrough with one of the girls they raised themselves here that was resistant to aging and disease. Come up to one of their successful hybrids, and it's a locust. At New Hope, the sires couldn't work as there were issues with them being sterile and sick. Yet he calls the locust perfect soldiers as they were controllable, able to reproduce from being able to just mix the emulsion-infected children and the indigenous creatures of the Hollow. But there was one child who had that immunity to emulsion, which was Mira. Her stem cells were spliced with sire DNA, but eventually grew strong maternal feelings, not just for the locust, but also her daughter, Reyna. However, her dad took her away from the place, causing Mira to rebel. Niles tells her she has insane abilities and that they would all try to kill her if they find out, to which she immediately pulls a gun on Del, then on herself, which Niles said would end her connection. Yeah, no shit. They tell him about Reyna getting captured, and he says that they need a new queen, otherwise they're just unguided. Kate then finally tells Del that she was the one that killed Oscar, or at least was there and is unsure of what she'd done herself. They then threaten to destroy him and all the research if he doesn't help Kate sever this connection. Niles tells them Mira wouldn't have resisted so much like Reyna did, and that Kate's grandfather was one of the geneticists here, and decided to take Reyna when he stopped agreeing with what they were doing down here. So my only question is, how old was Mira and how old was this granddad? Because that can get real weird real fast, especially since Mira was resistant to aging. So it's a little weird. But regardless, Niles lied to Mira about Reyna's fate, to which of course she did not let go. And he's proud of her for showing the Locust a path to independence, even if it led to his own demise. He brings you to the device where Mira learned to control her powers and says it should be able to alter her brain to sever the connection, while the matriarch here will guide her mind somehow, and Del certainly isn't messing with it, and neither am I, but she decides anyway. While in there, she sees the matriarch, her mom, begins screaming in pain, and right then Niles dips the fuck out of there. She says he used her, and it looks as if Kate woke her her up, and that she doesn't have that connection anymore. You find Niles' body frozen and cryo the entire place, and the matriarch has just escaped. Surely that won't be an issue, right? He also starts releasing the locust specimens on you, and it's really cool to be fighting the locust here again. It's not that they add anything different gameplay wise, it's just cool to see him here. He also starts talking to you mid-fight, typical of him to just never shut the hell up. They seem to have made it so the locusts will always evolve to survive generational conflict, so they'll always be back like cockroaches. Basically, they got hacks. The matriarch shows up for a little bit, spears Kate with a quill, then they close it off. Then now they've got to get through some old sires as well, and this time they don't just slap you like in Gears 2. They try grabbing you and they'll try dragging you away until they eventually rip your head off. It's honestly pretty damn scary. The sound that plays as you're dragged away genuinely shakes me. It's like getting taken in a Dead by Daylight game. Come across the matriarch again and they realize it's blind. I was really expecting him to know about berserkers. That's so weird. You follow Niles' juices, you're now fighting the matriarch. If you've played older Gears games, then you're familiar with the aggravate and dodge loop with berserkers, but this time instead of fire or a hammer of dawn, it's got a weak point on its backside between the quills that you'll need to shoot. She'll charge at you, launch quills at you to stun you, and leap over to you, which you'll need to dodge each of these. Reyna will also be interfering with Kate, obscuring your vision while she searches for you. I wonder if the person that plays as Del here, if you're playing multiplayer mode, would see Kate just malfunctioning during this fight, as he clearly wouldn't have this issue. So the most vulnerable you can get her to be is knocking her into these frozen puddles around by either baiting her to charge into one or shooting it under her feet. Rinse and repeat, and then she'll be done. I didn't find this fight to be all that difficult. It's long, and I definitely had some bullshit deaths or some accidental ones. There were a lot of people I saw complaining about this boss fight. If you were able to get Jack upgraded to this point, it really makes this fight that much easier. You can freeze her by dropping her in, or you can use the flash ability if you got the ultimate upgrade, and then on top of that, if you pulse her to add another 20% damage buff, this will also help the fight move way quicker. Again, it's just really long because you have to get around to her backside, and sometimes you'll get to her back and she'll unfreeze within a second of you shooting, so that can get pretty annoying. But like I said, there were certainly some bullshit deaths. Like this one, I clearly dodged away and still just got dragged by her feet. She'll start to curve towards where you're dodging at, so your dodge timings need to be absolutely perfect. Or this one, she leaped at me and I just died from, I don't know, is it splash damage? I did also encounter a bug where the matriarch just hopped up and left. She went into the ceiling and there wasn't anything I could do here other than just... They escape and get picked up and agree that the Hammer of Dawn is the next course of action to help end this, since Reyna's now been awakened as their new queen. Apparently there was some UIR data that they pulled, and Baird mentions an old UIR contact that he still knows. Damn it, I may have griped a lot about Judgment, but I still loved its characters, and if you've seen the video, you know Paddock was my favorite. So when I heard Baird say this, I can't lie and say I wasn't excited to the point of jumping up and down like a schoolgirl.
Welcome to Vasgar, home to the Union of Independent Republic's secret space program.
Never been in UIR territory before.
You still haven't. Vasgar was independent. The UIR had the pleasure of occupying... No, excuse me, liberating this glorious land. Okay. Two things I dislike, Baird. The Cog and children. You've brought me both.
Two things I dislike? Old men and deserts. And yet, here we are.
Ha! I like this one. Follow me.
Baird, they're here to find the lost satellites that the UIR decided not to use in order to recalibrate the hammer. Baird gives us hijack for Jack and is starting on another module we can see him working on over here. He then has us tested on a stump over here. I think I'd be more interested in knowing just how in the hell he captured one of these, and it's somehow not attacking them right now. I mean, it can't be the distance that they're at because we fought stumps at longer distances before. Is this explained in the books? Baird seems to have been able to tame one of the robots without Jack's help. We might as well just take him with us. He said earlier that he sent over DBs and leeches separately in a package. I don't know how he managed to capture the leeches either and then contain them in this space without them attacking back, but it'll have to be another detail on a long list of details in the Gears series I'm just forced not to think about. Baird clearly feels a lot of guilt for launching the hammer those couple of months ago and tries to avoid JD altogether because of it. Del somehow recognizes Paddock's accent from Goraznia, citing they're known for torturing and committing war crimes, which Kate is already familiar with. If the Cog tortured people, I wouldn't be surprised, but I would love to know that information. It would certainly help me understand more of her hatred for them. Something I will continue to address is how much this game requires us to just read between the lines with Kate's character rather than her saying much of anything herself. This is an example of one of those times, and I'll mention more of these towards the end of the video. Paddock explains that a few weeks ago the Swarm appeared to be smarter and making newer things like more armor and these new weapons he gives us called the Claw. This must have been right when Kate woke her mom up in whatever she was in, so it's clearly already had some effects that we can see here too. Although I thought the Grenadiers at least already had some armor and the Wardens did, but I don't know, maybe he means like shoulder plates and things. He tells you that their water supplies that are nearby have been cut off by the Swarm and that some of their scavengers have been missing for a bit longer than usual. And like the Mount Kadar area was searching for Lena and Norsko, this will be your secondary set of missions in the open area in the Vasgarian desert.
Oh, this can't be good.
I don't believe this. I hope you're not here to stop us.
Actually...
Because you can't.
Kate.
Maybe you should try listening for once.
Kate. I'm listening.
Yeah, well, don't bother. I'm done.
Okay. Because I'm here to help. If you'll have me.
I'm sorry, what?
Dad told me about Mount Kadar. What you learned. And... Look, I know you don't trust me. After everything that happened, what I've done, I don't blame you.
So what does Jen think about you being here?
Jen doesn't know.
Really?
And let me guess, he's here to pitch in too?
Yeah. Turns out, Foz isn't so bad.
No, I am actually. You just got used to me.
Who the hell are they?
Friends. They'll be joining us.
Yeah? I don't like them.
Shocker.
You want these two along? Fine. But I deal with you, not them.
You good with that?
Like I said, I'm here to help. Baird.
Come on then. Let's hop in that Raven and find some satellites.
No, Raven. The wind flares out there will kill you.
So what? We walk there?
Hey man, if you want to walk, feel free. But we got other plans.
Oh, it's not that skiff, is it?
Okay man, before we go, I got a bone to pick. A big one.
Sure. Pick away.
You lied to me. And then, after you got hurt, you pushed us away. Like we didn't even know you.
Look, I haven't exactly been myself, Del. I know that.
So who showed up today?
Your friend.
For what it's worth, I tried to convince him to embrace Dark JD. But something about you two brings out the best in him.
See, this kind of dialogue right here is exactly what I was talking about in Gears 4. Del wasted zero time getting into why he was upset with JD and expressing that to him. He still has more to say to him later while you play through this act, but he still doesn't express enough anger, in my opinion, for being lied to this entire time. Out of all the Nomads trapped, save one, yes, just one, trapped by the Swarm at one of the nearby water towers, and she's not too happy to be rescued.
There's no one in here. Oh, cute trick. Guess that's how you survived.
Namira, koget koi, okran posi durtini opsa fascist.
All I got out of that was fascist. You think Jack's got Google Translate installed? Paddock doesn't even seem thrilled about her being alive either, so no love lost, I suppose. You can see Paddock on the TACCOM for some reason. Just thought it was funny seeing him just stand there. Now at an astronaut or cosmonaut training facility to grab some beacons for the hammer. Apparently Paddock led an attack on this place with the UIR to attempt to launch the hammer on the cog, which clearly wasn't successful, especially by the looks of this light mass missile fragment here. I think that means Paddock took that light mass to the face right in the middle of this siege here.
Okay, Swarm assholes will be wiped clean. I'm aware of how that sounded.
Yeah, let's just move on.
Okay, I'd appreciate that.
Find the centrifuge where the beacons are. Don't stand too close to it or just get crushed to bits, I guess. I wish your body went flailing like an MTX versus ATV game instead of just disintegrating on impact. It doesn't really make sense, but you know it's Gears, so whatever. These locusts didn't even get to play the game here because their door was stuck. I doubt this is supposed to happen, but I appreciated the bug anyway. Thanks.
Yeah, I'll carry it to the skiff. Well, that's heavy. That's the important part.
Kind of relying on you to keep it safe.
Yeah, I get it. Fate of the world, no pressure.
He just must have had it in his Kratos pockets, I guess. Once you fully get their water supply back on, this lady gives Jack an upgrade for cloaking like she had earlier. And then Foz calls her a nutter just because he doesn't understand her. Like, oh my gosh. Kate tells JD to just worry about the rocket and disregards JD's concerns for her. Again, JD didn't do anything to her directly. I just want to make sure we reiterate that. Inside the rocket facility now, but the rocket's missing, so now it's time to find out where it's gone. The nose cone is off in the hangar to your left, and Baird will find the rest of the rocket in the meantime for you. While they're talking about whether or not they should use the hammer, Paddock will chime in with just blatant nihilism and doomer thinking that they'll all fail regardless of getting the hammer back online. But Kate says going scorched earth is better than letting the swarm take over. JD says he's glad he came either way, and she genuinely doesn't give a shit. Get the cone connected, and the rest of the rocket is on the far side of the desert, so you'll need to go there to get it and then send it back. Once you get back to the field with that beacon for Baird, JD tries to talk to him, but he tells him to wait on it, and he then gives you Jack's final ability, the Guardian Shield Barrier. And what better time to try it out other than immediately, since you all get attacked right now. Once you clear them out, you can set back out, and there's a convoy with the rest of the beacons currently under attack that Paddock tells you to go help out. They need to go under the bridge and further out in order to search for the rocket, and on the way they run into a wind flare storm with many tornadoes that'll spin you all the way to Kansas should you run into them. Once you get there, turn the train around, and it takes off without you, and the nomads aren't there at the bridge controls anymore, so you'll need to get there before the train does and ride through that storm all over again. Since the controls are busted, you need to take down the bridge with rockets, and JD thought the game should just end here. Yeah, I'm never doing an Iron Man run. Complete the rocket assembly, and then they start to ride the rocket towards the launch pad. Del nearly jinxes himself. Foz rescues him from it, however, and dangles from the back. Del could have just shot this motherfucker instead of just telling him it's behind him. He just sat here and let Foz fight his ones for him. Jack, for some reason, initiates the launch with them still here, so they've got to skedaddle, but this giant tentacle does not want you to get away, as it releases leeches and then flocks as you descend the tower. Good lord, this thing's ugly. This thing looks like the Gears version of a Sarlacc, the thing that ate Boba Fett. It'll steal people to eat them over and over, including you, which is why there's a bunch of rocks as covers here. Yeah, this land Leviathan will grab these small stones that sit in front of you rather than just ignoring the block and extending its tentacle like an extra 3 feet just to grab you. But thank God this monster's a fucking idiot, I guess. The launch initiates with you all right beneath it, but it hits the land Leviathan first. They get out, Paddock comes to rescue you. Foz somehow eats this hit. I know he's got a mechanical leg, but his body still took the force of this fat ass tentacle. Like, his lower part of his body does not survive this, but realism be damned in the Gears game. It also doesn't even look right either. It looks like he fell to his knees right before the tentacle actually fell on him. Not that he fell because the tentacle fell on him. Fuck it. Does anyone care? I'm just gonna tell myself not to care about it. We've got more pressing matters coming up to talk about. Looks like someone here was watching this all go down. Also, again, I cannot get over how beautiful this game looks. This is just outstanding. The rain, all their armor, the city, their faces. I love the details and the vibrancy of it all. Out of all things, the graphics may be the best thing they've nailed in this game.
So this is New Ephira, home to industrialists, techno-fascists, reactionaries, and cowards.
Yeah, also decent food, clean water, and showers.
Overrated.
So after ignoring him for the past 2 hours, she finally comes around and thanks him for his help. At least she's grateful for that, even if it still doesn't help me understand her frustrations, although Del never got to speak to JD like this. But anyways, Baird's got a PowerPoint presentation for everybody.
And now, observe.
Sure, nice demo, Baird, but is it gonna work?
Well, for that, we're gonna need a test fire.
Forget test fires. We need an actual target.
If we're selecting targets, shouldn't someone with real military authority be here?
It's Foz, right?
Yes, sir.
Shut the fuck up, Foz.
Yep, sir.
Baird says Jin's plan was to have Kate hook up to the hive mind in an attempt of looking for their version of Nexus, but instead he wants to rely on just her visions. Which, do we even know if she has visions anymore since she severed her connection? I don't know how that works. She hasn't had a headache since. Jin walks in, not caring for manners because she's just a prime minister. Classic. Demands Kate will go into the hive mind, but when Kate says the obvious, she attempts to arrest her, to which everyone bucks up for Kate, even Foz. I do wish we saw Jin's reaction to these guys uncovering more about the New Hope facility. Highly top secret information that literally places the COG at fault for everything that's happened and happening right now. We don't get to see or hear what she thinks on the matter. But the swarm interrupt what was going to be a really interesting encounter because Jin was certainly not winning this. How would this have turned out if not for the swarm's interruption?
And we're going out there.
Yeah, okay, I get it.
Yeah, the Onyx don't mean shit no more. Carmine stocks you up with a beacon to plant nearby, and Foz and Cole somehow already got theirs, even though they left behind us. Paddock's also got his own beacon on a Raven to another location. Carmine gets the first beacon down and it needs to recalibrate, and his progress also stops at 83%. No. These people are fucking with us. The consistent 83%, I'm sure of it. They just keep giving me PTSD. The hammer works, and they need to go plant the other beacon, so Cole gives you a lift. Plant the beacon on the other side of this swarmwalk and then get to use the hammer on it. Right after this, Paddock needs help and Marcus decides to stay behind.
Where Paddock went down. You three head out. I'll stay back and protect this beacon.
I'll see you on the other side, Dad.
Count on it, James.
You see the House of Sovereigns again, but probably the last time we'll ever be seeing it. And they see that the swarm has been starting a hive right underneath the city.
There, a way through. Come on.
Sounds like the same elevator chime in Gears too.
Come on, come on!
I love this tomb where you come to save Paddock at. Not because of the arduous fight you've got here, absolutely not, but for what you can discover here. Kim's cog tags are over here, and then you get to look at the memorial site of all the dead out here in the courtyard. Kim's here, Dom's here, all the members of Zeta Squad from the DLC, Del Please Move, a Will Carmine, who isn't a brother but maybe an uncle. He apparently appears in the Rise of Rom comics. The original Carmines, Loomis, and finally Dom, Prescott, and Adam. Although I'm sure there's a lot more names that are missing here, but this is a nice homage. There's a lot of names I'm still remembering now, like Rojas, who we found in the first game, and much more like that. Set the beacon up, defend it with the hammer, JD almost kills us, and we finish them all off. Things are finally looking up, and then those tentacles come back up again. The moment I've been waiting to talk about for years now.
We're here. Are the beacons synced yet?
If not, you may want to hurry on that.
Oh, don't you worry. I see him.
Nice shot! Oh, shit!
Delta, what happened?
The beacon!
You failed us!
Failed us? What are you?
We are what you could have been.
You might have her body, but you're not my mother!
Go, now!
We are a complete being, connected, immortal. You had a choice, and you squandered it. Alive or dead, you belong to us.
Reyna, or the Queen, gives Kate a choice after these two somehow fumbled each of their weapons, leaving them to attempt to fight with knives when she's got all these tentacles fresh from Japan. Who you choose will only change one thing for this game through the end. And despite Del being with us for the entirety of this game, and with me coming to like him more, I still like JD more. She tosses you the remainder of your choice as the building crumbles, and she just leaves. Even though she could just kill them all. Like, what purpose does it serve the literal Queen to leave 2 out of 3 alive here? I'll talk more in depth about this choice after the game ends, as it devastated the hell out of me, but there's still a bit to get through for these survivors as they don't have much time to mourn. Kate lives through what might be one of my greatest fears, but Cole saves them and he tells them to go meet up with Marcus. The Kraken takes out another beacon. JD's mad.
You know what? Let him come! I'll kill every one of you! I'll kill my fucking friend, you piece of shit!
Find Marcus.
How about you roll over? Play dead.
Help him clear out the area, and then he's wondering where Dell's at.
Thanks for the save. Hey, where's Del? Hey. Hey.
Heard you lot need a ride. Hey, Del, look who's saving who? Again. Oh, God damn it.
Gears, I need everyone back at the wall. Our beacons are down and the swarm's pushing through.
Copy that, Baird. We're on our way. You earned the man. Double time.
This scene hurts. Del didn't have too much impact, but I still liked the guy, and you could still at least feel the impact on these two. Even Foz's reaction hit me hard here too. They had their differences, but he still cared about these guys, and seeing him take off his glasses like this for the first time here just really hurts. Marcus is here to watch JD go through the same loss of a best friend, and as sad as it is to say it, I think these two needed this. It's brought them closer, especially in understanding one another, and it's the closest they've ever been. I think Marcus always understood JD, but JD finally has a deeper understanding of his father now too. Marcus was always there for JD, but JD seemed resistant to understanding his dad and was clearly doing his best to put his emotions past him. It shows how much JD has come since Gears 4. They did such a good job with this scene because I don't know if anyone played through this scene, regardless of who you chose to save, and didn't almost shed a tear even a little bit. But again, they don't have time to grieve for long. Most of the beacons are down and they need to go defend the wall. Foz will drive you through all the swarm-infested city, and they're destroying just about anything and everything. He gets stuck and the last beacon finally gets taken down as they keep targeting them, so you're all defending this tiny area with only your guns and Jack. After struggling with such limited cover for a whole episode of Seinfeld, Foz takes you off again.
Stop! You remember me? Now's the fun part, bitch! Come back in! You're goddamn home! Oh, when I said the fun part, I meant fun for the cold train, baby! Oh, what the... No! Cole!
Everyone, into that Minotaur! We'll cover you!
Look!
You know I ain't going out like that, baby! Cole, what are you doing? I'm buying you some time! Get out of there, Cole! Good idea! Oh, shit! No!
Go! Go!
How many times will Marcus be plagued by death of loved ones, man? Christ. Or the possibility of them, since we don't know if he's dead yet, and we didn't see where his mech body went. And something about me is that I never, ever believe somebody is dead until I see their body. Or if something like this happens. They finally arrive to the wall and it's the last stand. The swarm are all charging at you, breaking down your defenses, and Baird calls in some guardians and then just drops napalm. Carmine helps you up to a giant railgun, and then they decide to waste it on one flock because it has a super long charge time. Where the fuck did they get this railgun from anyway? The swarm were discovered just a year or two ago, so what was the purpose of this railgun before? Was it for the Locust? This is new Ephira, so I'm not sure how much from the Locust War or the Pendulum Wars was preserved, leading me to think that this was recently built. I just want to know why we have an extremely convenient Spartan laser on our doorstep, because there's no way they knew that this Kraken would show up, right? Shoot a couple more flocks and then the Kraken returns, where you'll need to do the same fight like you had in the desert. Some of these gears will die, Onyx, so that's pretty on brand. And I remember I used to have a really bad bug on this part when this game first released. These random COG soldiers would just get eaten up and it would give me failures for them dying. I wish I recorded it because I think the bug's gone now, thankfully, but it was just so frustrating for my first playthrough. Once the rails charge back up, you use it and it'll try sucking you all up until you shoot its tonsils out. And honestly, why doesn't this damn thing just climb up and break the whole structure? For how smart the Swarm have been up until now, you'd think it wouldn't waste time using tongue to kill you all, but we need a random boss fight, I guess. So Jack's been showing signs of just doing whatever the fuck he wanted to when he launched a missile and when he sent the train back without anybody knowing. So here he overrides Baird's controls, coordinates himself as the beacon for the hammer.
She'll be back.
I know. But not if we find her first.
I love the way this ends with her ripping off the pendant, but how much choice will she have in the matter come Gear 6? I guess time will tell. A long time too, since we're getting E-Day first most likely, and Cole survived, thank God. I figured he was alive since we didn't see his actual body, and like I said, an off-screen death is never a death. I just want to know how he survived, because he just kind of walks back on screen like nothing happened. Like we don't know where he came from, we don't know what happened to the mech body, how he got out, if anybody helped him. I guess it doesn't matter, he's alive. Sorry, no, it does matter, because they fake his death twice in a row here, and they gave us a fake out for his death in the beginning as well. Why do we keep baiting deaths just to not go through with it? What purpose does it have to keep doing fake outs like this? It's just annoying and honestly lazy. Y'all can afford to kill someone, you know, if the death has any impact, that is. And we all love Cole, but he's barely been in the game, so him dying would have came out of nowhere, but him having fake out deaths feels empty too. It doesn't show us he's some unkillable bastard because we don't even see how he survived whatever the fuck happened here. Like, this looks like death to me. That's so lazy just to be like, yep, he's fine, like a gotcha moment. The Kraken literally starts demolishing the entire entire street after this. So it really looks like Paddock shouldn't have survived this either. But again, this is Gears where they shove bullshit coincidences down your throat and it's getting real tiresome. And furthermore, why the fuck does it end like this? It's a really somber moment and I really love the music. It's spectacular. But where the hell is Carmine? You mean to tell me Paddock and Cole caught up here, but Carmine isn't anywhere to be found? Like, stop bullshitting me, man. And I don't know. I thought the story was gearing up to be a reminder that the humans can't keep relying on this massive weapon of destruction to solve their problems without some casualty of their own. But nope, it all works out okay. Were there any other soldiers caught in the blast? I guess we'll never know. And even if they start Gear 6 like, oh, actually that hammer blast killed many of our own, that's way too late to tell us that, because this should have happened for that theme to follow through, like Baird has been afraid of this the whole time since JD. But no, Jack fixes everything, the end. Initially, my thoughts here at the end of the game were a little lighter than this, but no, this ending upsets me too, because it accomplishes nothing but giving them an easy out of a foobar situation. Were we not just going to shoot it again? Railgun wasn't damaged, and it seemed to work. Could we have just not used it like 4 more times? I just don't understand why the hammer was used when I thought the theme was that the hammer can't solve their problems, but I guess I read this game wrong. Ugh, and we've got to wait until 2045 for Gear 6 because we're getting E-Day, which is awesome. Still excited, but this story needs to continue. It's been 5 years and we haven't heard not one peep from the Coalition on the next entry. Actually, I recently just saw some articles about how Gear 6 was planned to be when Rod Ferguson was still at the Coalition. Apparently, these motherfuckers were going to end up in space. I don't know how probable that is. I don't even know why they would do that. I've seen people say they don't have the technology for that, but like they really do. I mean, they've got a space station all the way out in Vasgar, and they've got a bunch of DBs that could really help them kind of build that up, but it would essentially just be letting them win, which is kind of what Paddock has been saying. He's been saying, just let them win the war, stop fighting about it, and just go survive anywhere else. I just don't know where the story would go from there. Like, would they just go to a different planet and then be like, okay, well, nothing to do here, just rebuild? I don't know. It would be hard to tell a Gears story from that point of view. If there wasn't an ongoing fight, I mean, obviously it would get pretty boring. I don't think space is impossible. I mean, I guess it would be kind of cool to see these guys in space, but I just don't think that should be happening in the next game. They've got a lot more things to cover than wanting to just leave the planet. So maybe it's a good thing Rod's not here anymore. I don't know. Okay, let's dissect a little bit further about how this game just fails to deliver. When we talk about characters in any given story and the way they're presented and how they interact with their surroundings, like the world, ongoing conflicts, the people around them, and their own thoughts, I think it's important to understand where that character comes from and what they've experienced, as that helps us as the viewer to understand their actions or decisions. However, your main character or characters do need to catch the viewer's attention. It's not necessary to always be likable, but just to catch your attention. The reason why we follow a story is either because the world itself is interesting, or the characters are interesting, or both. But having one or the other generally isn't enough to captivate people into wanting to care about the story you've presented them with, especially nowadays as the stories we consume become increasingly complex through its characters and the surrounding narratives. Why should I care what X does in this story, and why should I care what happens in this world to the people who inhabit it? There can be a main character that makes decisions you will dislike or hate, but there needs to be other things about the character that keep you intrigued, because a character that may act like a terrible person makes it harder to keep someone intrigued if there aren't other aspects that can keep the viewer around, like being complex in those horrible decisions they make, or having a likable trait despite the horrible things they do, like being funny, charismatic, or something like that, like Foz over here. You want to hate the character, but their personality or place in the story makes it difficult to do so, thus keeping you interested in that character and possibly rooting for them. The way to do that is by having dialogue and surrounding events that over time characterize your leading cast. In Gears 4, they didn't achieve this very well. In Gears 5, however, they do a much better job, but it still falls a bit short. So let's talk about the characters of Gears 5, mainly Del, JD, and Kate. We'll talk briefly about Foz, Marcus, and Baird in between as they're important supporting characters here, but it's these three that are the most integral to the plot. Something Gears 5 did really well was adding more dialogue for these characters so it doesn't feel like someone's first comedy show. This helped tremendously in not only making these characters more likable, but also helping us understand what they may think of whatever the situation may be at the time. They talk about what they've done before, their past experiences, things about themselves, what they may want to do in the future, what they think about what's currently going on, whether it's between themselves like Del to JD and Vasgar, or just about the Swarm's progression in general. I loved hearing what each of these characters had to say, especially Foz since he's new here, so it was crucial to really get to know who he is in order to actually care about him when he's on screen later on. Their conversations and banter all felt real, making 5 superior in every way compared to 4. It definitely seems like they put more time and thought into their dialogue, and I loved it. I have to applaud the Coalition for improving on this. So when it came to Del, I was really hoping this time around he would be more engaging to be around, and more of a character with his own thoughts and views, and that's what we got. Some people were upset with the fact that JD was missing for all of Act 2, and we'll get to that in a bit, but I think it was great for Del because he had been so attached to JD up until this point that it was nice to see himself away from JD. One of my complaints was that he was just a follower of JD all throughout 4, and while he shared his thoughts about their mission, they were always shut down or ignored. Mainly because they didn't really have much of a choice other than to attempt to save Marcus, but Del was always one to be careful. But that was it. He didn't really have anything else going for himself. We knew before he was a massive nerd, but it came off annoying and didn't really amount to much for his character other than more dull or cringy jokes. But here I found his nerdiness to be endearing. I grew to like him a lot in 5. He was still the same, a big bookworm being so well versed in history, with knowing what they walked through in 4, the science behind things like being the one to fix Jack with all these new parts and upgrades, and just being so ecstatic when you find new upgrades to add to him, or knowing so much about obscure information that isn't overtly helpful, but just something he just loves to talk about. And this time he wasn't just a nerd. We see he had his own feelings about the events of Settlement 2 and his own feelings towards JD and Foz that are different than Kate's, even if they both dislike the two of them. While he wants to believe in the COG and their mission, he sees how people act within the COG, and it was this event that made him want to leave, as he's the one that convinced JD to leave in the first place. He sympathizes with these people, even the protesters, even though he's on the opposing side of them. And he probably didn't even want to, but his loyalty to the COG got in the way of that at the time. But like I said, he sheds that and decides to leave and takes JD with him. While I mention these things, we still don't know much about Del outside of a couple things that I've said so far. It's more than what we were given in 4, but it basically just built off what we already knew rather than introducing anything new about his character. I enjoyed him more in 5 just because he wasn't throwing 3 jokes a checkpoint, not because there was anything new to add to his character. He's more of a static character, someone that doesn't really change in the story at all despite all the things changing around him, and that's fine, and hearing his fascinations with science and knowledge is great, but I still could have deduced that from the 4th game. It didn't tell me anything I couldn't have already guessed about his character. There wasn't anything new to learn from him. It was like we peeled off some layers of his character, and what we found underneath was just the same thing as the outer layers. We still don't know how him and JD met, where Del's from, why he may feel this strong feeling of justice and loyalty. That's really it. He still doesn't have any goals, and he's still just following another person. It's just now Kate. Del simply just has no depth to him, and that's massively disappointing. And not to compare the black guys within the Gears franchise, because there's only so many of us, but Cole was someone that also stayed the same for all 3 games. If we include Judgment, same thing there, which did suck because remember, it felt like Cole was barely a character in that game, but he was favorited by fans because of his energy that he brought. He was the entertainer of the group that finally got an ounce of depth in the 3rd game. And like we always say, characters in Gears don't get much development. We all know this. These people in these games are not that deep. They just aren't. I could talk for another hour or 2 about how the characters in this franchise don't normally have as much depth, but I don't think I need to. It's been very clear that spectacle and gameplay come first before the more intricate parts of its story. It's just that with Gears 4 and 5, it's also become clear that they want to take a step in the direction of a more character-driven story. We say this every time, but Gears 1 established who they were, and from then on, they do not change as characters much from start to finish. They didn't have events that centered around them. They didn't have character arcs. They largely don't change from story to story, and rarely do we learn anything new about them outside of Marcus and Dom, and that's not saying much. But they somehow were all still likable. Maybe the Coalition was really trying to get away from the Macho Bro stuff. I mean, you can see this with how they treat Foz, and that's okay. Make your game more accessible to other audiences, but it's clear that they couldn't think of any other way to portray likable or memorable characters. Besides Marcus, Cole is the most memorable character in the series. To me, at least. And look, it's not like we can't say Cole is a stereotype. Like, it's 2024. We can fully say that this man is a loud, energetic black man. It's alright. On the whole, I don't think people had a problem with it, mainly because he was still likable anyway. The man was just so damn funny and likable that it didn't matter that he didn't have enough depth to him.
So Mayday, we've regrouped with Cole. Baird and Sigma are MIA. We're assisting on the search. Is that what you call it when I save your ass?
Delta.
Regroup. That's a good one. Good thing you got your star player back, Delta.
But he still got some anyways in 3. The thing is, Cole isn't replaceable, and neither are the other 3. But Del feels replaceable. That's how little his character feels to me. There just isn't enough there to make him stand out. It's like they were deciding how to have Del be in the story, and they thought they don't want to make him another black guy stereotype, but couldn't think of anything else in what I imagine was a short time span, so they gave him so little to work with. What's sad is that the Settlement 2 situation could have been something that really gave us more insight to his thoughts as a person, but it doesn't because the Settlement 2 fiasco was poorly done. Something with so much buildup didn't really amount to much when it could have had so many ripple effects. Once again, JD is my favorite character. Yeah, he didn't have too much going for him in 4, but he was the only one with any depth, and it was enough to care about what his character arc may have looked like moving forward. Like I said in my previous video, he cared so much about trying to prove himself as this leader that can handle any situation that comes his way, no matter the circumstances. At first in Gears 4, this seems like just a way to make up for the fact that he's the son of 2 war heroes, with one being the recent prime minister. Like he was trying to prove himself capable of being something great and worthy of following like his parents were. But once the cat's out of the bag about Settlement 2, we find out that it wasn't only him trying to prove himself capable of living up to his parents, but also trying to make up for his failure at Settlement 2. He's clearly shoved down a lot of guilt over that event and tried time and time again to prove that he can make these difficult decisions. More so proving to himself that he can do it. Be that leader, make the tough calls, and come out okay on the other side, even though he puts those around him in danger through his own decisions. This all finally catches up to him when he gets Lizzie and these other civilians in the truck here killed, and even harming himself in the blast. And moving forward, this scar on his arm is that permanent reminder of his biggest fuck up, and he can't atone for it. All he can do is just try to do better in the coming days from then on out. This is why when we see him after that day a couple months later when Oscar dies, he's working next to Foz and under Jin again, more subservient. He's relinquished his place as trying to be this leader he envisioned he wanted to be. And he did get promoted to captain, but not just because of his skills, but just for being compliant with Jin. He doesn't want the responsibility of leading anymore, he just wants to follow orders from now on. I doubt he even really wanted the promotion in the first place either. When he's here after Oscar's death, he's more focused on following orders and continuing their mission rather than fretting about what just happened. This was that dark side they refer to JD being on. Not caring about what's really right, just doing what he's been told. Gather the outsiders, return to base, and report back for new assignment. That's the order, and this clashes with Kate here. It's a big low point for JD, even if it doesn't initially appear that way. Just like his father, he doesn't like the cog too much, but is so ashamed of himself and his actions that he'd rather just blindly listen to orders like Foz here rather than question and do his own thing like Kate. Now, a few weeks after Oscar's death, he's not here on Jin's orders, but just to help. He doesn't even tell Jin that he came here. He still doesn't trust himself, so he puts his trust in his friends and believes that they're doing the right thing rather than blindly listening to authority. It's all he says to Kate while she's yelling at him here. He just wants to help. He doesn't want to resume taking point of their group. He's fine with Kate taking that role as long as he can offer a helping hand. I only wish his transformation and turnaround and his mentality wasn't off screen, for the viewer at least. I get it's from the perspective of Kate and by extension Del, so it would need to be off screen, but we could have gotten a small, maybe even separate act with those two. I guess the gameplay would have been different because they don't have Jack, and it wouldn't have added anything to the ongoing story because they wouldn't have anything to do with Kate learning of her lineage or have anything to do with recuperating the hammer, but it would have been nice to see. But maybe that's just a personal want, because I think the point of JD not being here for Act 2 and randomly appearing for Act 3 was to show the realism in their relationship between these three, with JD disappearing and just reappearing again. Having a chapter with JD and Foz and whatever shenanigans that they would get up to would show JD's change or show that Foz isn't a full-on asshole, and this would be cool to see and maybe play through, but it would undermine the point of seeing things from Kate and Del's perspective. You're supposed to be in their shoes and get to hear how they feel in Act 2 and see what they feel when JD shows back up again. We're supposed to have the same reaction as Kate or Del here when he arrives. Where have you been? Why have you been acting different since Settlement 2? Why just return to us now like you've changed when we didn't see any of that? That's the biggest point. They didn't see any of it. That's what adds the difficulty, but also realism in this schism between these three. It's supposed to be uncomfortable and rough and should take some time to reconnect all with each other again. You, the player, should feel as Kate feels, even though I think it would make more sense in Del's shoes to feel some level of betrayal rather than Kate. The granddaughter of the Locust Queen Mira and daughter of Reyna, the new queen of the Swarm. This was pretty much guessed by the entire community at the end of Gears 4. I mean, what else could this have possibly meant? We all knew that this could have been the case, we just didn't know how it was going to turn out. In 4, she rarely spoke, so the only thing we knew about her was that she cared for these outsiders here and her mom. And she wasn't like these two throwing jokes around, so she was really just a flat character and had little to no substance as a person in the story. Now here in Gears 5, she's someone with massive headaches, a clear connection to the Swarm, but says nothing about it at first. I felt like her and JD were supposed to reflect one another in their actions. These two, especially Kate, get mad at JD for withholding information about something he did, but Kate does the same thing. She didn't do anything in 4, but she withheld the Locust symbol from them until Oscar's death, and doesn't say anything about what happened with his death until she's at Kadar and only to Del. So when she gets upset with JD here in Act 3, it initially comes off as her just being so unreasonable with him, but after taking some time to think about it, it really just seems like a massive projection. Now, a lot of people when this game first came out, including myself, were pretty upset with how she acts here in Act 3 when JD and Foz meet up with them. But I'd like to offer another look at this scene and maybe defend Kate's outburst here. For both Kate and Del, JD withheld that it was his decision. It's not the decision itself that was terrible, but the fact that he chose not to mention it to them. He let these two believe that it was just a malfunction in the DBs all this time. That's close enough to a lie, and for someone like Del, who feels immense regret about the situation, practically blaming himself, it's completely reasonable for him to feel so angry with him for holding this in and then distancing himself from these two after the truth has been revealed. But Del's frustration for some reason seems less than Kate's, as she wasn't even there and had absolutely nothing to do with the situation. Like I said, this initially confused me the first time I played, but after playing this through the second time, I like to view it as she's just projecting a lot here. What bothered me at first was her being just really unreasonable with him, so much to even just outright disregard JD, putting everything down, most importantly his ego, though, to surrender to these two and just help. He's no longer trying to be that leader and make those decisions anymore like I've been mentioning. He doesn't trust himself to do that yet. He's abandoned Jin and trusts these two and just wants to regain the trust of them. Like I mentioned, his change was off screen for us playing as Kate, so she didn't see him have that shift in abandoning Jin or recognizing his wrongs. He's just like, hey guys, I've changed, even though we haven't spoke about what happened at all, so I understand them being a little upset to him upon his arrival. They'll take some time to warm up to each other again and address the elephant in the desert here. But only Del does, and Kate seems pretty dismissive of JD for most of the time, from when he lands until they launch the rocket. Unlike Del, she doesn't outwardly express her feelings through words, just through these tantrums. My understanding of her, especially after just learning of how much the Cog has kept secret, including her own lineage, is that she has a very, very deep-seated hatred of the Cog. They kept their grandmother and mother captive and kept this secret. They killed anyone that found us out. They've been attacking, and as we first hear from Kate herself, torturing her camp and family for as long as she's known, just for wanting to live outside the Cog walls. Kate's been openly and supremely anti-government this entire time. Del and JD, even Marcus, seem okay working with the Cog again, but she's the only one that's hated the entire experience, and is supposedly the only person these outsiders they've been recruiting have been listening to. She hates Jin, even though we only see them interact twice in the whole game. She also hates Foz, someone who is very pro-government and pro-authoritarian. She despises everything the Cog stands for and does not like taking orders from people. We saw this before with her mom in Gears 4. We also saw this with her not wanting to have kids, and now with the iconic
"Screw your order."
So JD, one of her most trusted friends, being a captain to her is like switching sides. To Kate, it seems like it's government or no government. He's following orders just like Foz is. Remember when Oscar said he believes in a more anarcho-collective approach in Gears 4? Sure, he was drunk, but, and this is my guess since, again, we don't know how these outsiders work, unless it's explained in the book, but I assume this may be how the outsiders function to a degree. It's also how Paddock's group of nomads function, same with Paddock's old group in the Aftermath DLC in Judgment. No government, a collective of people that all own things collectively, not authoritarian where the top military regime owns and dictates what happens in the nation. And she seems to find more alignment with these factions than the Cog and those who inhabit it. So not only is JD on the other side, she probably thinks that JD was in a complete wrong in the Settlement 2 situation, despite him saying they were literally wielding and eventually chucking firebombs at them. I think she believes that JD should have just not acted in the manner of self-defense, because defending himself is defending the Cog and not siding with the protesters who are protesting the same thing that Kate stands for. Their right to choose where they want to stay and live and not stay within the walls under the thumb of an authoritarian regime. JD's choice was naive, and yeah, maybe he could have done things differently, but to say he was in the wrong is an extreme side of the argument. It's okay if you think he's in the wrong, but saying he's in the wrong is an extreme answer of saying that he was in the right, just like Foz. Foz had no problem with these protesters getting lit up, and Kate thinks that they shouldn't have done anything at all to them, with Del in the middle just upset that it all happened, and most likely wishes that everything would have went differently or wouldn't have opened fire altogether, but also probably understands JD's choice, which is why he doesn't ever bring up the fact that he killed those people, just the fact that he withheld the issue from him altogether. And if Del was in JD's shoes and decided not to open fire, then these three probably would have died to the protesters' firebombs. Death would have happened regardless on either side, and sure, these people were fighting for their own rights, but is bloodshed justified on either side here? I don't believe it to be as black and white. It's a tough situation from the sounds of it, and we don't know what we would have done in his shoes either. So I don't think we're supposed to like Kate just to see her side of things, or maybe understand where she's coming from, even if we don't agree with her behavior. It's partly what Paddock was talking about when answering why he decided to stage a coup and attempt to launch the hammer. He thought a just war was better than an unjust peace. It was also followed up with a joke, but I wonder if Kate would believe in the same thing. People would still die, but it would be for a greater cause of freedom in their eyes. It's an interesting conversation to have, and this game doesn't handle it well at all, because like I mentioned, Settlement 2 is never brought up again for the rest of the game after this encounter. The Settlement 2 situation had the potential to introduce so many complex topics with war and peace, and show the difference between each of these characters' viewpoints, but it doesn't. All of this kind of leads me to the swap in the player character. A lot, and I mean a lot of people had an issue with JD no longer being the main character to play as, and some people's takes, at least what I saw initially, just seemed baked with blatant misogyny and tended to lack actual criticism of the Switch. Well, a lot of the criticism about Kate as a whole had a lot of misogyny thrown around, which was just annoying, because her being a woman has nothing to do with her being a poorly written and displayed character. I was actually glad they did the Switch. I mean, she's Mira's granddaughter. What would our player experience have been if everything was from JD's point of view? We'd never know about these headaches she's been having, even though these really should have had more consequences to it besides Oscar's death. I felt like the headaches and visions didn't play much of a role in the game. Maybe she could have almost shot Del at one point before they get to New Hope. Your main character is supposed to be the main driver of the plot. What would JD have done for the plot of this game? Their goal was gathering outsiders. Kate's been the only person that these outsiders have apparently wanted to talk to. Then they find out about her lineage, and JD just would have been a helping hand had he had gone to Kadar with them. And as much as everybody makes fun of this line, she's right though. It is about her. Because if it wasn't for Reyna being reawakened, they'd be after Kate for for her connection. It would literally be about her. Hell, it's always been about her, even since 4. The main objective was to find Kate's mom. Yeah, a couple of times it was find Marcus, but he too was also just a helping hand in the bigger picture. Playing as JD at the start of 5 was almost like a bait and switch. They actually pull this on you when you get to Act 2. Like I mentioned, Del almost faked me out here with the first time, because he meant Jack. This was clearly on purpose. JD is only Marcus's son. That shouldn't instantly make him a main character by proxy though. He can and stays a major or important character, but being the main driving force of the narrative, no, that wouldn't even be feasible. His lineage doesn't matter here like a lot of people want it to, but hers does. However, remember what I said about main characters. Besides her family tree, is there anything else interesting about Kate's character? Can't think of any, can you? I certainly can't. And that's one of the most disappointing things about this game, and a very acceptable criticism of her in this title. She's supposed to be someone finding herself, but she doesn't have any other existing qualities about herself except for being abrasive as hell and sometimes just kind of mean. In Act 2, she states a distrust for Del and JD as the swarm, or whatever's in her head, the hive mind I guess, has been making her think that they're out to get her, so she spends most of the time in Kadar being paranoid of Del, betraying him, but still belittles him for pretty much the majority of their time together. She constantly questions his reason for being out there with her, essentially his loyalty to her, but also dismisses most of the things he says. They have some light banter going back and forth, and she states her gratitude for his willingness to join her a couple of times throughout their journey here, but other times she would just loudly sigh or dismiss him as if he was being annoying, when all he would do is just talk and get excited about Jack and his upgrades, and I don't really know why she's acting like this. Maybe in Gears 4 he was annoying, but not here in 5, at least to me. Even if he was, he's the only one sticking his neck out here for her besides maybe Marcus. Thinking he's gonna betray her doesn't mean she gets to be shitty to him unprovoked. Del doesn't even seem to take it that way, but he doesn't really respond to it much either. He just eats it. And we already spoke about how she acted in Act 3, and even after this, she doesn't show any qualities that make me any more intrigued with her character. She's still a boring person, and on top of that, she's sorta shitty to people.
I did some training in the Deadlands back in OCS. Let me know if you want a few desert pointers.
You know, only one of us grew up in a city, and it wasn't me. I think I can handle it.
Okay.
I think that being shitty to people is and will be a part of her development, but besides that, she's got nothing going on for her. And it's not to say she shouldn't be a shitty person. There's shitty people, but still likable characters. Again, look at Foz. He's an ass, but I like him because he's funny, understands himself as practically a himbo, and doesn't overstep anything. My biggest issue with this is that I wish Kate's point of view was a little more explored, as the characters that aren't even main characters here have more understanding than her. It seems we're just supposed to interpret all of her anger and think about her side of things all from her actions. There's many opportunities she has to further state her distrust of the COG. They could have added in more in-depth dialogue when she references things like never liking DBs. Instead, she says some of the most vague shit possible. Like, okay, why have you never liked DBs? Give us even just a crumb of what your childhood looked like so we can form some sort of understanding and connection with this character. I promise you it's not that hard. She literally doesn't say a word about the Settlement 2 situation for the entire game. She actually doesn't speak much to begin with. And I said we should at least care about the main character. It shouldn't be artificial. The character should at least have some quality about them that makes us want to keep coming back and seeing them in their respective world. But Kate doesn't have any of those qualities besides being generally a piece of shit to Del half the time and just ignoring JD for most of Act 3 and slightly coming around in Act 4. But that's it. The only other reason we should care about Kate is because she's of royal blood. Other than that, they gave her no personality whatsoever. She isn't charismatic, she isn't funny, she doesn't have any interesting outlooks on life or war as a whole like Ty. She isn't entertaining at all, and it's such a major failure for her character. We as the audience had to do too much work to understand where she's coming from. All that I just explained about my interpretation of her character, unless it's in the books, how many times have I said that by now? I have no clue what kind of person Kate is besides a young, rash, abrasive woman with so little nuance to her she could easily be an NPC in the next game, and if it weren't for her being the queen's daughter, I wouldn't notice her absence. And her lack of development leads me to the choice at the end of the game. So for me, when there's a choice presented, it's always what does this choice actually mean? It should make the player think about what the outcome should be, but that outcome should also have an impact on the story through whichever one is chosen. And story-wise, only one of these choices has a greater impact. So let's talk about Kate and the fact of the choice itself, then discuss the difference between Del and JD as choices, as they don't feel like equal choices to me. I think this choice also indicates something maybe a little bigger that I haven't seen mentioned before, so I'll discuss that here as well towards the end. Remember when they said Kate might not have control over her own actions? I thought that would be an interesting factor here with this choice, but her connection was severed, so it might not be an issue anymore. However, she still had visions or headaches or whatever during the fight with the matriarch, meaning she's still connected in some way to the hive mind. Jen even wants to put her back back in the hive mind, but I suppose that's just a loose thing that'll hopefully get addressed in Gear 6. So having Kate make this decision to me takes away her agency right at arguably the strongest moment in this game. Sure, it's still technically Kate's decision within the story, but it's not really in her hands since it's our decision as well now. I prefer it when choices like this are out of the player's hands, because whether we wanted it or not, the main character or whoever we're playing as at the time was going to make their choice regardless of how the player feels. Say what you will about The Last of Us 2, I'm still bringing this game up, but I don't agree with the people that say they wish they had a choice to actually kill Abby at the end of the game. Not only for the fact that it's not a freaking choice-based series, but also for the fact that it was Ellie's decision either way, whether you like it or not, and it's the way her character arc's going to go in. Gears 5 is also not a choice-based game, so that also threw me off here. But to bring it back, this also applies to Kate. Whether she chose Del or JD, it would have been her choice, and that's what the creators of the game would have intended for her character progression moving forward. But now it's split up in two directions of how Kate's character could progress in the story, to where it seems like the devs gave us the choice because they couldn't make the decision themselves. They instead left it to the player to choose something so crucial that either of these choices could heavily decide the future of Kate's development. When her character already feels lackluster in the story, this decision being hers could have given her more depth or more understanding of how she truly feels. It would have had us asking, oh shit, why would she choose Del over JD? Or why would she choose JD over Del? And that's much more compelling to think about. Instead, the game asked the player, what do we think she should choose here given what we've witnessed throughout the 4th game and the 5th one? It doesn't help because we're choosing for her. And if you try not to choose and just let her do it, you just end up dying. This literally forces the player to consider what they think Kate would and should do here. It leaves Kate's character and development entirely contingent on the opinions of the player, not what the writers may have intended. Why is she snapping so hard at JD in these two instances? Is it because she genuinely cared about the morality of his choice? Is it because she cared so much about the topic of the protests and the people fighting for freedom? Is she upset because Mira or the hive mind itself could be changing her or manipulating her like we saw at Kadar when her vision was a different version of the actual conversation that happened? Does she have a problem with authority itself? Or is she just acting like a child? And consistently, we see the differences here between these three and the old generation. They're a lot younger, didn't live during a time of constant war, even though Kate had conflicts with the COG. It's hard to believe it consumed so much of her life, and even so, it can't be anything compared to what these guys lived through. So yeah, it makes sense these guys, more specifically Kate, would be a little immature in how they act. With JD's arc as the primary example, these guys have a lot of growing up to do. But while JD showed clear growth and improvement by the end of the game, Kate did not show any signs of improvement in her character. There was one time after Foz says he enjoyed his time here, and she thanks JD for his help, but that's about it. Even by the end of the game, neither death that she might be responsible for seemed to have any impact on her. Her reaction to Del and JD's death are the exact same. She doesn't even have different dialogue for either scenario. And why didn't Kate develop any leadership qualities when taking up the mantle of being the squad leader? She only earns it by JD not wanting it in her family tree, but she's never had an instance of wanting a leadership role or even having any qualities of one to begin with either. And it could be a, oh, no one else wants to do it, but you gotta do it thing, kind of like with Jon Snow, but that never happened. She just assumes the lead as if nothing happened for her to get here and doesn't have to face any issues as being a leader, like making a hard choice like JD did. Again, maybe it'll happen in 6, but why wait till 6 to start showing us signs of development for a main character? They kind of did that with JD too. We don't need to push all the development back and just shove it in one title. It'll feel rushed, and I can almost guarantee everybody's going to feel the same way. This scenario shouldn't have even gone down like this in the first place. I mean, where the fuck is Jack? How did none of these three have so much as even a pistol? I know the rumbling just happened, and we see their weapons go away, but that doesn't mean the pistols they usually have holstered are gone too. These guys always have a pistol holstered. They've never not been shown with a talon in their holster, and this hit wouldn't have made them drop those too, otherwise they would have shown those talons also sliding down here. So you mean that out of every interaction in the game, this is the only time where they didn't have a sidearm? Just this one scenario. Because guess what? Right after this, Kate has a sidearm again. Just really contrived. We've never seen anybody in this entire franchise attempt hand-to-hand in this game, and for some reason these two goofballs thought to try it against the Swarm Queen of all people. This scene just feels heavily contrived in the first place, and honestly, I don't think either of these two even needed to die. If it was anyone that needed to die, I say needed with heavy air quotes, then for me, my choice was Del, and let me explain why. Like I said, the game asks you, what do you think Kate should do here? Not what will Kate do here. So the question here is, why do you think Kate should save Del? The only reason I see for saving Del from Kate's perspective specifically is because he was with her for her journey. He hadn't been wary of her headaches up until JD said something about it, because otherwise Del seemed unfazed by the fact that she withheld the locust symbol on her family heirloom from them until now. He never cared or really seemed to judge her in any way, and he just seems like a sweet guy. Again, I like Del, but I'm questioning from her point of view, and from her, she seems like she just kind of tolerates Del, here and in Gears 4. But other than that, it's simply just because he was there, and she still nearly killed him, which I don't think she ever even apologized for, by the way. Looking outside of Kate's view, what would Del provide in the overall conflict? Well, he is like another Baird in terms of intelligence intelligence, so I assume he could take over his role should Baird ever need to step down. I mean, he is getting pretty old. Del would be a great hand in whatever technological aspects they would need in the near future, should Baird not be there to provide or just need help. He showed how useful he was throughout their whole journey in Kadar with his brains, so it would be sad not to see what role he had played in the future. But unfortunately for him, he hasn't had any development all game. Him and JD seem like they squashed the beef fairly quickly, so now there isn't any conflict that he's involved in. Besides what I speculated for him, there's nowhere for his character to go unless they introduce some random new conflict for him in 6, should they do a split storyline. He just doesn't compare to JD as a choice. And that's not me saying I like JD more. I mean, I do. They just don't feel like equal options. JD just has so much more going for his character because they poured all the writing into him clearly. To be fair, he already made his change and was trying to be better about his past decisions, but having Del die instead of him and reconciling with his dad here seemed to also help resolve their own issues through the mutual feeling of losing a friend. And the biggest point, he's Marcus's son. If I'm being honest, this wasn't something that was going through my head when thinking of who I wanted to save. I would have saved JD regardless because I was questioning who did I care about more for me. I wasn't thinking from Kate's perspective at the time. And thinking that saving JD because Marcus has lost enough also isn't thinking about what Kate would want, it's thinking about what you would want as the player. And that's the major disconnect here with this choice and why it fails to hit the mark. They put up a character with a full character arc against his friend who got the opposite treatment. I didn't care or feel strong enough for Del to feel like I was torn between these two, and it wasn't Del's fault. Del dying does fit for JD's character, but it shouldn't have been our choice to make. They should have just went full send with his death. But before killing him off, do a better job of making him a more memorable person. Again, I like him, but it still wasn't enough. He doesn't have anything iconic or super interesting about him. All those things I mentioned about him being really smart, he's just a black Baird without the personality to make him memorable enough. He's got no flaws, no bigger aspirations, no controversial opinions. He doesn't have much of a backbone except for speaking up to JD for a couple of minutes. JD, on the other hand, even though we may have missed the biggest part of his growth between Kadar and Vaskar, we still saw him have a change. Players will obviously feel stronger for him. Even if it wasn't for him being Marcus's son and the story was the exact same, the choice would still heavily skew in JD's favor simply because the Coalition gave him actual depth. It just wasn't fair. Even comparing their respective aftermaths, JD's reaction seems a bit stronger than Del's, even though they mostly share the same dialogue.
I'll kill every one of you! I'll kill my fucking friend, you piece of shit!
And the reveal for Del's death here feels more impactful between JD and his father, even with Foz's reaction rather than JD's death. The only thing that seems to hit hard is obviously Marcus's reaction to his death. This almost brought me to tears, especially because they have to get right back to it, so he sucks it up so fast, even though you can see how hard that was for him. Same for his ending without JD. Instead of JD, Del consoles him here at the end, and because these two haven't had much time together on screen, I don't feel as much emotion watching this scene as I do watching a father and his son here. Del has said before he basically grew up with JD at that estate, so I know they have a relationship, and he's the one that gave him his own bandana back for whatever reason, but because I didn't see any of it, this ending doesn't match up to JD's ending. This choice just bothers me on so many levels, not only for what I've mentioned so far, but also because it takes the agency out of Kate's hands. Something I think should have been her choice to make becomes the player's. Sure, it's still her choice, but we have no idea how she feels about either choice. I'm more interested in seeing what she would have actually chose, not just leave it to the player. It's up to her to decide what she values more. Her almost boyfriend that withheld something similar to her, or the guy that was helping her through her own, albeit unfinished, identity crisis. Again, I ask, why the hell were we given this choice to begin with? Not even mentioning the fact that this is Gears of War, a franchise that clearly never had this kind of player choice in it. All we had to do was choose what path we wanted to walk down, and it was always irrelevant. It never mattered before, so why start now with this choice of all things? To me, this screams super lazy from the Coalition. I feel like they also didn't know who to choose. They didn't kill off Cole, and maybe they thought someone needed to die, but even they themselves couldn't pull the trigger on one, so they made the player choose for some reason. Maybe they wanted to kill off JD, but I don't see what purpose that would serve. Killing Del, unfortunately, makes more sense. I think the only reason killing off JD would work is if it had an impact like Del's death would. Del dying impacts JD and Marcus's relationship, but doesn't impact Kate all too much. She doesn't seem fazed by either of their deaths, actually. If JD dies, it doesn't seem to impact Kate much, and Del's upset, but his reaction just doesn't feel nearly as powerful as JD's with Marcus. JD's death only seems to affect Marcus here, and I don't know how necessary that is. Del's death should also impact Kate more, as he's the one that spent all this time with her. Maybe she saves JD, but feels horrible because it took her till then to realize Del was there with her the whole time. But see, this is what I meant. It's up to the player. But if I go by what I saw in game and made the decision based on what I've witnessed from my perspective as Kate, I'd guess Kate would actually save Del rather than JD. She didn't treat Del that well, but JD was just not present enough until the final hour. Kate didn't seem to care too much about JD to make me think she'd feel stronger in saving him over Del. And that brings me to my last point on why this choice just fails in every aspect, and doesn't really make sense to toss in here with how they did the characters. When we get to Hivebusters, we'll see a much better trio than these three here, and I think that's a major issue here. These three are supposed to be the strong three amigos in this game, but they feel so disjointed in this game with JD splitting off, and they never have a chance to get back together again. There isn't that moment where they're all together and it feels like the gang's back. Of course, it never felt like there was a gang to begin with. I think these three should feel like a tightly knit team, but from Gears 4 and now even more in Gears 5, it feels like they have their own respective relationships with each other, but not one full group. I think this mostly falls on 4 for not establishing these characters that well, because JD splitting off could still work, but they never have a moment together again. I do think they should have had maybe one more act. This is the first time they've only had 4 acts in a game rather than 5, and the game clearly suffers from it because it feels so painfully short. If we were given an extra chapter between Act 3 and Act 4, then maybe we'd see their bond strengthen a little bit, and then this last choice would feel a bit more impactful regardless of who's chosen. And that's the worst part about it, and why it doesn't feel like an equal decision with relatively equal outcomes. They reunite in Act 3, and there's just a couple instances of them all talking to each other again, but nothing substantial. Even JD and Baird were supposed to talk at some point, but Act 3 ends so quickly, then you're thrust straight into the end of the world with the swarms destroying the city. There was no time in between for any emotional beats from the beginning of Act 3 all the way till this choice. And if JD dies, him and Baird never get that time to have that conversation. Sometimes characters don't get to have the conversation they needed to have because one dies before having that chance. And that's okay. Just would have really sucked because JD dying would leave a lot of loose ends with Baird, Marcus, and even Dell, because I don't think they talked long enough about Settlement 2. I mean, there wasn't enough talking about that to begin with. Like, why did we get so little information about what actually happened? I haven't spoken much about it, and that's because there wasn't much to say. They didn't give us many details for it, and I wish they did. Why did Dell never say how he wished things would have happened? What he thought of people throwing fucking firebombs? No one wants to talk about that part except for Foz. Sure, he's an ass, but throwing firebombs at the military is a good way to get shot. I don't think they deserve it, but things can escalate quickly. We've seen how riots and protests have gone in our own country recently. Dell had nothing to say about those finer details, and don't even get me started on Kate. She says fuck all about the entire situation, where we could learn more of what she thinks of the COG, or what she thought hearing about the situation, and most of all, why didn't JD offer any more reasoning behind his decision making? Make these characters vulnerable, open them up. This Settlement 2 situation is something that happens between these characters that they all could weigh in on, give us depth to their characters, and have the player taking sides as I imagine they have varying perspectives. I don't understand how they could have messed this up. This choice could have been just that much more impactful had they had them provide their thoughts more throughout this game. What did either of their deaths provide to the story other than random sadness and despair? This choice calls you to question, has JD been redeemed through his actions from Kate's perspective, or should Kate care more about Dell's loyalty to her? Excluding who JD is, that's what this choice bottles down to. But it just doesn't work because JD had little time to repair his damage done with the group, and Dell was loyal, but Kate barely seemed to care. So when we get to Gears 6, there's a couple ways that they can handle this, and since we have no idea how they might because they haven't told us any news about this game, we're just left to speculate about it. Are they going to pull a telltale on us and render both options useless by giving them similar outcomes and things to do, and both maybe die early as to not split the storyline too far? Or will they have two dedicated stories, which might be why they're taking so long? Or will they do the dumbest thing possible and bring the one you killed back from the dead somehow? I actually have my own prediction I mentioned earlier about this choice and what it could spell for Gears 6. So they've already made major implementations into Gears formula. We've got an open world, we've got Jack with a skill tree, and we have our first major split choice. That's getting close to attempting to be an open world RPG style game. I actually think it's possible they're considering moving Gears closer to an RPG title, or it's just more of a mix like they did here with these open worlds and Jack's abilities being akin to RPG mechanics. It's possible, but I'm quite skeptical of their execution here. Overall, this here just misses the mark on what I think a player choice should do in this game. It could have been an opportunity to give insight to Kate's perspective of things if it was just her choice, or it could have been difficult emotionally for either death moving forward. But they share the same dialogue and almost the same scenes, with Marcus being the only difference, to where neither of the deaths feel as impactful as they should, and this highlights the overall failure of these main three characters. If this game was just one chapter longer, then I think this decision here would have been more impactful, but it just wasn't. Actually, there's an article that just released where the Coalition stated that they just may choose what the majority of players choose. I guess that means that JD is going to live, but that still sucks because Dell is just written out of the script entirely, and it shows that they had no plans for a way around this choice that they gave us, proving my point that it shouldn't have been a choice to begin with, and even they didn't know what to choose. Just wow. Let's talk about Hivebusters before this topic gives me an aneurysm. I don't need to go through bit by bit with the Hivebusters DLC like I do for the main story, since the gameplay is pretty much the same besides the abilities they give each of these three, and I've only got so much to say about its story. Not because it's bad. Actually, my only complaint of this DLC is that I just wish it was longer, and maybe some annoyances of his boss battle, but that's really it. The story is about these three soldiers, a retired Onyx guard, an outsider, and a delivery driver. We're all pulled into the COG to, quote, help in the fight against the swarm, but we're sent on a mission that that they were given little information about, as they don't know who's in charge of the mission, what their destination is, or what they're being sent to do. They all accept it as shady getaway vacation or something. After crash landing and getting stranded on what I'm almost certain is Pandora, they're able to radio for help, get picked up, and discover the one who recruited them for this mission is Hoffman, along with Hannah Cole. Yes, Coltrane's daughter. I'll be honest, I second guessed if she was before they actually tell you for sure that she's his daughter later on, because I, for some reason, forgot that Train isn't his last name. Cole is. And she is black. So anyways, these two direct them to a facility called Sanctum with the objective of delivering a toxic gas to the center of the hive. Once there, they learn not only was this extremely top secret, but that this was the failsafe to Azura, except it didn't pan out very well as it was built in a fucking volcano. Yeah, I don't know what they were smoking here. I'm sure the geothermal went crazy, but I'd rather fight the locust than be down here stuck eating the same plants rockworms eat. And I'm not making that up either. After getting down some distance, Mac decides he's not willing to die for something so minor and chucks the gas grenade into the main shaft from the 3rd floor, assuming it will get deployed at the bottom, which is another 17 stories down. Which, fair enough, you can see all this nasty shit on the way down. Absolutely not. Keegan, however, was willing to die for such a thing. This, of course, leads to the gas spreading immediately and just causing general destruction, so they need to leave, even using JD's trick. The gas does work on them, mostly that is. Yeah, in gameplay, that splash damage would have got his ass, but you know, whatever. Although when they escape, they jump onto the giant door and begin riding down a lava river. Ride the lazy river down with a few mishaps, and Tax saves them just narrowly. If it was me here, this rope would have slipped through my fingers and I'd look like one of those random Elden Ring deaths where they just jump off for no reason. They report back, Mac and Keegan arguing over failing the mission, and then Mac suggests that they use whatever that was being thrown at the swarm when they first got here, and Lonnie remembers that the Walehi, I think I pronounced that correctly, some god of her grandmother's tribe here, so they decide to go meet up with these people on the island and ask them about it, and Hana also joins the fight. Hana talks about how Cole did her best to keep her away from the military as well.
Dad said, one Saren with an education could do more to turn the tide of war than a single grunt with a gun ever could.
And I mean, if he feels this way, I'm just again surprised he didn't have anything to say about Settlement 2 when Foz, JD, and Del are all arguing besides a joke that didn't fully indicate what his opinions were. Hearing from Hana, it sounds like he definitely had his thoughts about it. Once they actually get to the main building that's been blasting music like an EDM concert, it looks like the Walehi version of the Rapture occurred. Lonnie reads the Walehian rite of passage for the Wakatu and discovers that this bird-like entity is what was shooting poison out at the beach, so they're now officially poachers. They try catching up with probably some snatchers, see that some of them actually got murked, with them wondering how the swarm even got over here if they didn't burrow underground, as it seems impossible. Catch up a little bit, see all the feathers from the Wakatu the residents have collected, with no one in sight but the warden looking for a rematch. If I didn't have help, he would have won this rematch too. The toxin starts making you hear some deep fears or memories that they each don't want to hear. And I also found out if you play as the different characters, they each have their own different thoughts that come into their head, which is really cool.
They destroyed this place. All its history, its people.
Goddamn swarm. We're gonna visit the same fate on their entire species.
I still don't understand how they got here from Pahanu.
Looks like we found an answer, Hannah. The lava tubes. This is how they got here.
Lava tubes? Then maybe they're connecting the islands.
Hannah, above you!
Shit! Nothing I can't handle.
Damn it.
The tag team here is just crazy. Also, this dude genuinely died from the height and not just being shot. That's really hilarious. This motherfucker must not have hit his quota for humans stolen this month, because he could have just tried another way about this. Not seeing how the swarm have been navigating the island, they used the same way to get Hana back. These people must have some crazy shins falling like this 3 times in a row. They managed to save Hana, but are all the way back on Pahanu, where they initially fell out of Sanctum at the heart of the hive, and Mac has an idea of letting a snatcher take them, but it's a work in progress, possibly relying on Hana for science-y stuff. Wakatu interrupts their escape, putting them back on their feet. Mac tries getting Keegan's head out of the cogs and Hoffman's ass, and Hana spells it out for him. They arrive back to try and hunt down Big Bird.
The First Minister rejected my plan to deal with the swarm. She said her damn robots could handle them. So I used my forced retirement to launch a mission of my own.
All this time, we were on a goddamn rogue operation?
That's right. Look, I know your past. that you've all suffered and struggled, but you've still got that fight in you. Purpose. That's why we're here.
It was our lives on the line.
The fate of the entire planet is on the line, soldier.
I'm not here to save the world. The swarm took my son. Dragged him, screaming, into the dark. I failed to protect him. To fight for him. I joined up to make these fuckers pay. And I planned to die doing it. But here we are. So, to hell with it. I'll live. And I'll fight for what family I have left.
I won't stand by and watch more people suffer. Not when I can do something about it. We know how to get to the heart of the hive. All I need is one sample.
And you'll get it. But I won't let my brother face this one alone.
Wish I could have been there for you, Mac. And your son. But I'm here now.
Well, that's it then. Once more into the screaming dark.
Lonnie also tells us there were locusts that the countermeasure didn't reach, which was her role cleaning his stragglers up without letting the public know. But she pulled a Marcus and got court-martialed as well. Once they finally get to Big Bird, it's clearly not going down without a fight, and after a very long battle...
Awaken. Reborn. Renewed. Not consumed. Your heavy burden. Transformed. Light. As the feather.
Ready for this, Scorpio?
If I don't make it, I want you to know, it's your fault, and I'm gonna fucking haunt you.
How's your nerves, Major Howe?
Oh, to hell with my anxiety. This time, I'm the surprise.
See you on the other side.
I gotta say, I really enjoyed this DLC. It was very succinct and felt like enough to really capture all three of these guys. I ended up loving each of these three and just wanting more out of them. And thankfully, there is more material on these guys and their Hivebusters story. So I'll have to add the Hivebusters comic to my backlog of readings, but it may get moved up quicker than what else is there because I really just enjoyed their whole dynamic. I mean, they all start out practically hating each other and it's just so damn funny. Well, I shouldn't say hatred. Lonnie more just tolerates the group, but Keegan and Mac are at each other's throats for most of the first half, just bickering with each other. And it's just fun to hear them go back and forth.
The fighting chance.
Do you even know how to use half this ordnance?
Sure do, Grandpa. My dad taught me to shoot. You'd have liked him, I think. You're quite similar.
Soldier?
Asshole.
It wasn't corny or long-winded, none of that. It felt like an argument between two very different people with very different perspectives. I mean, it's natural. You pair together someone who's as far from the COG as he could be, as he's just a normal DoorDash driver, with someone with so much love for the COG despite how he's been treated even while in uniform, you're gonna get differences in how they operate and think together. Mac criticizing the military and Keegan disrespecting Mac for being an outsider that doesn't know how to fight. Maybe it's just better when a group of characters you have working together on a main goal each have differing views or opinions that come up in class. clash. And it's this back and forth that eventually leads to them learning how to work together so well by the end of their mission, with them sharing each of their pasts and how they each ended up here. They all support one another by the end of it, and you get to see it culminate in an impressively short amount of time. Just in comparison to Del, Kate, and JD, these guys managed to capture my interest for them so much quicker than they did in 2 games. We know each of their backgrounds, their personalities were out in the open basically, and because of those two, we come to know their flaws and how they each think fairly quickly. You even get to learn more of how they think and feel if you manage to get the collectibles, like Keegan still feeling so patriotic about Sanctum and its purpose, Max still feeling like a failure because his kid died while out delivering, or Lonnie being separated from her home and vengeful of the Locusts, and Swarm who took her cousin Ty. Yeah, she's Ty's cousin. I mean, yes, her last name is Kaliso, but I didn't know that when first playing. It only shows their first names, so I didn't know. It's just sad that even by the end of Gears 5, the Hivebusters trio just feels better to me. The gameplay here was also just jam-packed with fun. Jam-packed? Is this a movie trailer? Why did I just say that? It was the interesting level design they had in these different environments compared to the base game. You were in a freezing mountain and a vast desert, then a crumbling city, so this was a fresh environment to play through. Each level had some interesting environmental element that mixed in with the gameplay, like on the beach with the rotor blades, which I didn't know would kill me the first time. Those vents that are in Sanctum, the entire lava river with falling lava to dodge while maintaining your position, and even some lava spouts while tracking Hana down. I only really had a small issue with the lava river run with having to maintain so many different angles, but that's also what made this section fun and challenging, so I can't really complain that much about it. Really just might have been a skill issue. Each character also had their own objectives specific to them, which felt kind of cool. Like only Keegan could open the doors in Sanctum with his clearance, or only Lonnie could read the Walayan scripts. They each felt important in some way. They all each had their own special ability, basically the abilities from Horde and Escape. Keegan had an ammo refill, Lonnie was the Blade Master, and Mac had a shield. These abilities weren't as useful as I had hoped, at least while in single player mode, like Mac's shield. Maybe he's not over the fact that we kicked him out of the plane, that he doesn't want to help. I mean, he already got his payback. You better be glad that team damage isn't on. But you were able to use any character you wanted in a playthrough of this, so I could have just played as Mac for this and worked that out. It just sucked that the AI wouldn't move up in front of me when I call his shields out. Because for Lonnie, it didn't matter what the situation was. If I activated her blade, she would get in the fight. But using their abilities nonetheless was still pretty fun to use, especially the ammo drop. I will say it did suck that none of their abilities were all that useful when it came to fighting the Wakatu as a boss, which I can say was a way better boss battle than this shit here at the end. And it's a bird, not even connected to the Swarm or Locust. It was a frustrating fight, but once you learned how it moves, it wasn't all that bad. It just had an ass load of health and could spawn right under you sometimes where you had little room for cover, so you really needed to hug those walls and trees here. But back to the abilities, they didn't provide much use, except for Keegan's coming in clutch, as there were other guns laying around, but this is such a hyper-mobile fight that going to pick up guns could get you killed in an instant since they're always out in the open, so staying in cover gaining ammo passively was always the move. Because for Mac's shield, I mean, he's not blocking all of this, as the Wakatu would even go right through you at some points and shoot right past you on your sides, and I don't know what Lonnie's gonna do here. But all in all, this is an amazing DLC, and I honestly hope to see more quality like this in future Gears titles. From level design to characterization to the storytelling, it was just a fantastic experience, and I wish I could relive playing it again. It's unfortunate this game had such a rough release back in 2019, because if they had just waited or listened to the players more, the overall experience could have been much better. Rod had said they tried betraying the fans while still keeping them around and staying loyal to them and what they love. I don't think that's that bad and kind of an admirable thing to try out. Change is fine when done well. They wanted to make changes to not only move Gears in a different direction and alleviate some of the monotony of the OG Gears, but to also attract new people. It's just sad how they managed to do the opposite of both. There's certainly been some new people to join the Gears fanbase, but I feel like we lost more people than we gained. From the horrible bugs and number of crashes, some of which are still issues to this day, a whole 5 years later, to the story itself being underwhelming, short, and just feeling like there's really no conclusion again, with the multiplayer being lackluster and money hungry with so many changes to it, like the 4v4 change or the initial extreme monetization schemes. It felt more like the Coalition just cared to get this project out for our wallets. But for me, the worst offender, despite the praises I've given it to this point, has been the campaign and its gameplay in it. I just had so many issues that got in the way of my playing experience, and then I, like many others, had issues with how these characters are handled, the length of the game, and the ending. Let me run through just some of the issues I had with the gameplay, because it's honestly unacceptable how some of these things still happen in 2024. For starters, the weapon swap was bugged multiple times. The option would appear and then just disappear over and over, which was really frustrating. Or sometimes the option to swap their secondary weapon out just wasn't available. Then there was the skiff weapon holder. What's the point if it's going to do a magic trick on my weapon anytime I decide to leave the skiff? There was also a point where the game saved the checkpoint mid-fight for me. Then I died in a way that I'm still confused on how it happened, because it was from a torque bow, but there were two guys firing them. This one's went off already, and this guy here still holding his, but I explode at the same time he seemed to release the bow as he's then reloading right when I died. So I don't understand my death here, but to top it off, the game froze. Yeah, the game just kept on playing and still trying to save the checkpoint. I selected to go back and it just stayed here. I tried doing it from the pause menu and the only option was to go back to the main menu, so I had to return to the lobby, in which it took much longer than usual for loading back to the menu. It seemed to work fine upon a reload, it was just another huge inconvenience. I also had a weird bug where Jack's abilities just stopped working for me. Del was just standing here in the fire and eventually he walked through after I pushed him, but I still wasn't able to use any abilities to get myself through the fire. It's like he had to stem on permanently. I just needed to do a reload, but it was just a little funny seeing him stand here like this. Another random explosive death was at this Kestrel fight where I shot these rockets and just exploded. I was clearly not close enough to this wall here for it to blow up, and I'm aiming pretty high off the ground, so I genuinely don't know how I died here. There's many deaths I had in this game where I just up and die with no understanding of how it occurred. I initially thought I shot myself, but being able to rewind it back and really slow it down, you can see I shot the rocket twice, where the second one actually launches, and before the third one even launches, I just randomly explode. I don't even think the rockets were shot at by the Kestrel. I just died.
Really?
Again, I could never do an Iron Man run in these games if it's this buggy to this day. I'd just be so pissed. And while we're on this section, there was also some robots that came back, but that's not where my problem lies here, as they had a reason for fighting bots this time. It was that they deployed here before registering these guys as COG. My problem was this Kestrel fight and the layout of this area, and this goes for many fights in the game. It was just difficult because it felt like there wasn't much room to take cover from a floating enemy. It was just an annoying area to fight in. Another section that was just a frustrating area to fight in was this Pouncer section I mentioned a while ago. The Grenadiers could get to you so easily, and the Pouncers could easily surround you, and in spots where you just didn't have many options for cover. I just mostly had to pray that they wouldn't get in certain spots to avoid them. And I know I've said I enjoy these lake sections for being able to sink whoever's here, but it also limits the space you can take as well. This fight in particular is egregious with its design, and I sort of fucked myself coming here armed with only a Boltok, boom shot, and a breaker mace, but even still, there's a protected stump up here, and then a bunch of rejects, and only a frozen lake between you and them, making this a distance fight where approaching is more than likely resulting in death, but staying back here leaves you defending on this tiny rock from incoming rejects, leeches, and dodging the stump that you can't attack without first dealing with the Guardian. But it takes time to shoot that Guardian, then you've got these other enemies approaching you. This is a fight where you really just need to abuse Jack's abilities, abusing the frozen lake in front of you, and hopefully maybe having a functioning teammate other than an AI like Del, because Jesus. They've proven to me that they really just hate the player, or just don't know how to make these sections all that fair. Giving one piece of cover here just sucks. You can't go on the lake with zero cover. There's nowhere to shift cover to. If you get bombarded, because you certainly will, there's nowhere to retreat. You just have to hope that the stump is shooting at Del at the time, otherwise you're genuinely screwed. I can't see how this section made it past playtesting. It's doable to complete, clearly, otherwise people would never finish this game, but it should not be this difficult. This goes for hardcore and up. I'm sure it's not that bad on lower difficulties, but higher ones, this just feels unfair. I'm also sure if I actually remembered to utilize Jack more than I did, then maybe it wouldn't have been as bad, but that goes for the majority of Act 2. If you don't use Jack or upgrade him, you're in for a rough time. There were also some weird cutting corners with transition scenes and animation, because this section with the ice lake had some weird animation cuts in and out of the area. Coming into the area, she jumps down, and instead of it being one full motion into the area, it instead cuts to her coming down and landing in a different spot than where she was about to jump to. And then when leaving the area, Del is propelling her out, then it just randomly cuts to her being out of the cave. Just a little lazy of a cut here, really. In addition to climbing animations, this is a small complaint, but I wish when carrying a heavy weapon she'd actually toss the weapon upwards and then climb, rather than just a weapon disappearing and reappearing once she got up there. There's also some slide down sections like this one here, where she auto stands up every time as if she landed, then re-enters the slide animation like more than halfway down the slide. Even JD and Del have the same issues going down sometimes. It's just annoying to see every time I go down, because it could have just been one full animation, but it breaks it for me since this happens every time you go down any of these kind of slides in the game. But yeah, I just had too many bugs or glitches or weird mishaps that impacted my experience both times playing this game, as I'm sure it impacted others. It was way worse on release. I never had major crashes in this current playthrough, but the first day I played, bugs, glitches, and mini crashes on the Xbox One. It was really bad and super annoying. It's why I had to stop playing after I beat the game. I beat the game initially on insane mode, and for some reason I didn't even get the achievement because it said I never completed the Ice Lake sections in Act 2. I was not doing that part again with all those bugs, crashes, and the overall difficulty of that area. It was just too frustrating. And I saw other people have the same same issue with their achievements just not showing up. There are a couple more gameplay changes that they made that I really just didn't agree with. That felt a little out of context to mention with the others, so I'll just talk about them here. My major issue is when enemies are aiming at you with the sniper. It gives them a laser while aiming at you. I don't really like that this is here. It just doesn't really make any sense. I think the glint is enough information for the player to know when to take cover. They don't need a laser aiming at them. This isn't a one-shot. Information for the player is great, but this doesn't make sense to me and felt a little too much like hand-holding for me. And then there were those stealth sections that could have been better, but I don't know what could have been done better considering it's a Gears game. There's really only a few of these sections, one here with the Warden in Act 2 and a couple in Vaskar in Act 3. In Act 2, there wasn't really a reason why they were stationed out here. At least in Vaskar, it seemed like they were puppy guarding the people's water supply or the space facility. But even in that space facility, if you stealthily take out all the guards, they just spawn more right in front of you after you kill them, which is stupid. Your reward for actually using the stealth mechanics in the game is just having to have an open fight anyways. If I go through trial and error of stealthily taking down enemies, I want it to have a payoff like just being able to move on to the next section. If you get caught, then I get the point of adding more enemies, as in they call for reinforcements, but I didn't get caught here. They just sent more reinforcements anyway as if you got caught, and that makes no sense. It's the same in these open world areas too. You kill everybody in the area, but you still have to fight the Warden. In Vaskar, you kill everybody here, but you still have to fight the Scion, who spawns in more anyways. The stealth mechanics are only helpful for taking down a few drones initially, but it never saves you from a full fight like other stealth games do. I love stealth sections, but these just feel a little stupid to me. I enjoyed using Jack's abilities, but it was only Cloak and Pulse, as all the other ones are offensive abilities that'll immediately blow your cover. So maybe these will see some improvement in Gears 6, hopefully. And before we get to the story, I have a sort of tangential question to ask before that. For almost every person that says they dislike Gears 4 and 5, one of their main complaints is typically the fact that they have to fight robots. My question is, why does it bother you all so much? It did get a little monotonous in Gears 4, but you only fight them for 2 very short acts. After that, you literally never have to fight them again. Even here in Gears 5, they're on your side, so you don't fight them save a couple times in Act 2. Because now in Gears 5, the robots are on your side, but will be overridden by the Swarm, and the way you fight these corrupted DBs is much different than how they were in 4. I don't know, I'm just confused why fighting robots seem to be such a pain point for people that it's one of the top reasons they dislike Gears 4 and 5, when you mainly fight them in 4 and not even for more than a few hours at most. I think they serve a bigger purpose than just a space to fill before the Swarm. The robots are a clear indicator that despite humanity surviving, they still need a lot of help in rebuilding and maintaining their own order. The robots are a symbol of that order, even though they were initially supposed to be support bots for rebuilding. The humans of Serra have created their own problems and got bit in the ass by them every time. Everything they try comes to bite them back in their own ass because of the divide between so many humans. They probably wouldn't need to use so many bots in the first place if they were actually able to unite people rather than having situations and conflicts like Settlement 2 and other various factions against joining the COG. So when they use bots to fill in the spots they would need humans to fill, and those same bots start getting overridden by the Swarm, it only emphasizes the need for unity among humans even more than before. They can't keep relying on their technology to help save them, they need to actually work together. I just don't get the hate for the robots. Okay, sure, they aren't the bloody Swarm or Locusts, but again, they aren't as plentiful as the Swarm to fight, and even then, they're not that horrible to fight against either. What I will agree with is that there should be a bigger difference in your gameplay when fighting one compared to the other, to show just how outmatched these bots are to the Swarm. There were enough monsters to convey this, but they really didn't hit that mark until seeing the flock do this shit. Now, my issues with the story. Man, we've already been here for a while, and there's still just so much to say. I'm still heavily anticipating Gears 6, like everybody else is, but I'm more waiting to see what they'll do and how the hell they plan to actually finish the story up by the next game. Although, in that same interview with Rod Ferguson, he said they don't want to think of these newer Gears titles as another trilogy, like how most stories make it into 3 parts. He wants to think of it as an ongoing story and not necessarily attribute a definitive structure on it. So who knows, it may not even end in Gears 6. Maybe we'll get a Gears of War Infinite. But besides that, it feels like Gears 5 just could be filler. Once Kate finds out about herself, it's then said Reyna is awoken, but there's zero tension following that. So it makes the following section of the game in Vaskar feel super unserious. They're here to get the hammer back online to help in the fight, but they aren't affected by time. At least they don't mention it if they're on the clock or not. It's why they seemingly were always one step ahead of them and in the areas they needed to go to. They knew what these guys were up to the whole time, which is something I wish was mentioned at least once, because it seemed like they were tracking Kate because she has a connection to the Swarm, but they say that her connection to the Swarm was severed. But like I said, in the fight with the Matriarch, after her connection was severed, it seems like she still had a connection to them. Gee, it's almost like they cut a chapter out of the game or something. This is a similar problem for Gears of War 2 as well. They see the desperate attempt to attack Jacinto, and they already were thinking they need to attack their home before the Locust attacks theirs. The difference is that Gears 2 has them discovering so much more than the origins found in Kadar. They ventured below, they saw Dom's wife and Ty, they saw Nexus, the Locust Palace, all before the final fight to protect Jacinto. It was a filled story with ongoing side plots and kept the tension high enough because the underlying thought is is if they don't go through with this, especially after seeing the worm, then they're going to sink Jacinto. But for Gears 5, we learn about Kate, something we genuinely already guessed at the end of 4, then fight the matriarch, something I wish played a bigger role in the game, and then fucked off in Vasgar getting the hammer together. Why didn't things feel as urgent in Vasgar? It felt like some fetch quest with some action mixed in, but nothing substantial at all happens in Act 3. Besides this beautiful desert and the Kraken here at the end, this area is honestly boring as hell. Nothing is learned here besides some background information and slight world building with Paddock, Baird, the group of nomads, Foz, but nothing truly important is learned or occurs here. These guys have their conversation at the start, then for the rest of the chapter, it's Kate just ignoring JD and rarely speaking otherwise. Remember, my problem in Judgment was that we never saw what our major threat was until the very end of the game besides the beginning. Yeah, they did that here again. Act 4 is fun, but purely because the city is under such heavy siege that it's cathartic seeing so much destruction occur, and just really cool and a real treat with the new graphics. But then it's undone because it felt like we got here super fast. We got 3 fake out deaths, 1 real death dependent on player choice that doesn't even fit, and then Jack dying. It kinda sucks having Del die and Jack die. It just feels really shitty, but losing JD would have felt shittier. Then the actual ending doesn't even feel like an ending. From the ending of Gears 4 to the ending of Gears 5, what were the goals of the main characters or main groups, and what was actually accomplished? Well, the big question at the end of 4 was, who the fuck is Kate? We already knew what the Swarm were, taken humans and crystallized locusts. The only other questions were, if the locusts never died, and they're growing faster by taking humans, how the fuck will the humans win this time? And lastly, what the hell happened at Settlement 2? There's other much smaller questions hanging, but those were the main ones that Gears 5 should really be addressing here. Well, Kate was answered within the first half of the game. She is Mira's granddaughter, and her mom is the new queen, who's now reawoken and a major threat to humanity. Oh, and Settlement 2 was answered in the first act of the game, so that's 2 major questions already answered. Now it's just, how do these guys plan to combat the Swarm, especially now when the Swarm can take over the robots they once put a lot of their military trust into as infantry. Now they really need to bring people together at a time where communities are split to fight against a major threat. The outsiders, the people like nomads, and the COG. And the Hivebusters DLC fills in that gap. It gives another way of fighting back against the Swarm and brings these 3 people together. But the main story? This is them gathering their collective shit together in order to attempt to fight back, but not actually fighting back. The fighting back doesn't happen until New Ephyria gets attacked the second time, and even then they're really just holding off, not really fighting back. My point is that this feels like this story should have the feeling of the humans being on their back foot, but it doesn't feel that way when playing through Acts 2 and 3. Our most pondered questions are answered in the first half of the game, and because we don't have a single secondary character with any goals of their own, like how Dom spent Gears 1 and 2 searching for Maria, we have nothing going alongside our main plot of figuring out the hammer. It makes for a boring experience because literally nothing happens for hours worth of gameplay. I enjoyed hearing some of Foz's background and more of Paddock, especially how Paddock is almost always right, thinking that the hammer is a waste of time, but that's it. So the characters weren't as bad in Gears 5 as they were in Gears 4, but Kate still feels almost empty, especially for a character that you actually have to play as this time. JD is great, but we don't see him enough and he can die. Del is better than he was in 4 and more likable, but we still don't learn much about him that we couldn't have just known or guessed in 4, and he can also die. Foz is cool, and Marcus, Cole, and Baird are all just Marcus, Cole, and Baird. I think Cole talks a lot, but that's more of a nitpick.
Lizzie's from the speed of it. You're the best driver we got. Problem is, yeah, she knows it.
I just still wish he had more input on Settlement 2. And the plot is similar to Gears 2 like how Gears 4 was similar to Gears 1, but really falls short with a much shorter and more shallow campaign with a really lackluster ending. Why have we fought 2 random beasts back to back? These 2 are still unidentified, and I don't need all things answered, but it would be nice to understand a little bit about these things. What happens if the Swarm just decided to attack them with another one right now, or even in a couple weeks from now, even a month from now? They don't have a Hammer of Dawn, Jack's dead, so I don't see them being able to win this here at all. Some other unrelated questions. Why did Reyna decide to let Kate have free will here when that's sort of against what her lineage subplot is about? What if she doesn't have a choice in her link to the Swarm? Does Reyna have much choice here? We don't know. And I have another question. Where are the actual locusts at? Like, Scions are still the locusts, just crystallized and stronger. So what about the crystallizations of the other locusts, like Cantus or the Boomer variants? What about the other larger creatures, like how we see crystallized Brumox that they want to call Swarmax now? What about crystallized Corpsers? Would that be Swarpsers? That sounds stupid as, or even Reavers? Where the hell did did they all go? The Swarm surprisingly have 0 flying enemies, excluding the Flock, and any corrupted guardians that they take. Where'd they all go? We hear in the Hivebusters DLC that there were locusts that survived the blast, and I'm willing to believe that there's more survivors than we actually think if they had a secret task force dedicated to killing them. The locusts before seemed like their own entity before as creatures of the deep. I don't have a problem with their origin being a lab creation, because I kind of guessed that in Gears 2. It just has a lot of weird inconsistencies regarding time and a few of the variants. Gears 5 is an okay game. Its story falls a little flat. Not as hard as 4 does, but still really doesn't stick the landing either. With a super buggy release, initially horrible microtransactions, a somewhat bare open world with a much shorter story with what feels like half of a plot, and a main character cast that just doesn't have anything that stands out about them except for the 2 that got somewhat vilified for a portion of the game, Foz being more deserving of it, and JD, who didn't deserve much of it at all, and was the only one to have any sort of development. Del had 0, and depending on how the Coalition handles Gear 6, it's just written out of the story, killing any chance of development for him. The gameplay kind of saves the campaign with Jack's abilities, a couple of the new weapons, and some of the environmental aspects, but still has many issues like Jack not having the more fun abilities until later than halfway through the game, and not much opportunity to use them. The rest of the gameplay is still Gears of War gameplay we've already come to know. There was also the open world sections, which weren't terrible. I enjoyed it for a little while, but outside of finding the relic weapons, or getting more components for Jack, there isn't much reason for venturing outside of your main and side objectives. If you didn't do side objectives, then you missed out on some of Jack's upgrades and a couple components, but that's really it. There are a couple smaller moments you may miss, like smaller conversations, like hearing that Baird has secretly been a gun runner for Paddock and his nomads, but you won't be missing much. The side missions also weren't all that intriguing either. The few outsiders you track in Kadar just ends in a sad way with them both dead and not much gained plot-wise from following their trail. And with the nomads, they're grateful for your help, but helping them doesn't do much for you besides the Jack components either that you gain from it. It would have been cool if either of these side missions had more of an impact than the main story, but they just don't. But this is the first time they're trying to do Gears with an open world, where they made the world seem big but still stuck to the Gears classic linearity, which each area you visit being its own area, where none of the areas in either map connect with each other. So I just really hope that they add some more substance to the open world and improve further on the gameplay and Jack's abilities. Even though he died, I'm sure they'll just make another one, or Dave will get fixed up or something. I hope they improve on the storytelling too, because this game could have been so much better. The bones are there for it, but the meat's just lacking. I already threw my theory of them moving towards an RPG style Gears of War game, or Gears game, but I really don't know how, or even if they could pull it off. I mean, I think we've got bigger things to tackle before moving towards a different format for the story mode, but hey, what do I know? The usual development time for a Gears game is roughly 3 years, and we're approaching year 5 since Gears 5 released, and it's E-Day that got announced first, so it's probably going to be another 2 to 3 years before we hear anything about Gears 6. I also hope that if we get another time jump, that the time in between games is better explained to the player. Maybe just a cutscene or two, or even just some dialogue about what's happened in between could work wonders. I think there's a lot to like about this game, and a lot to dislike about it. It's not a bad game, but after really dissecting it, it's hard to put it up higher than a B if I were to rate it. Maybe a C at launch with all the bugs, including multiplayer. Although while this game has many valid criticisms, I've never understood calling it woke. Some people have said the game has gone woke with a female protagonist, or having too much politics or emotional conflict. First, I already explained Kate. She's royalty. Second, each Gears game has had to deal with politics. Politics is baked into all media, whether you like it or not, and especially a game about war, where the humans are the root of most, if not all, their own problems. And lastly, I think this game didn't have enough emotional conflict. There's only Kate's outrage after her uncle dies, a scene people love to meme to death, and their quarrels with JD, all of which are political and emotional. It's a big point in JD's development as a person, and I don't think we even got enough of it. You get even less if he dies and Del is saved, so I disagree with all those points. You can say Gears 5 feels boring, or not as engaging as the others. I'd agree with you there, but not on those 3. Thankfully, the main game has Hivebusters. It was genuinely an amazing addition to the game and the story as a whole. It's a way they're fighting back against the Swarm, and it was just a fun story with good and fun characters to follow. Like I said, this DLC made me more inclined to go pick up some Hivebuster comics rather than the main story. You know the comment I made about comparing Gears and Marvel together with their 2 separate mediums, and how you should be able to follow a story in a Marvel movie as a casual non-comic reader and still follow along, and how Gears just doesn't do that very well? You can tell it doesn't do it well based on how you feel after playing or while playing. In Marvel, if there's something that's like, oh, you'll find the answer to that in the comics, well, the story and characters of Marvel were fascinating enough to follow that I'd love to go and read about them. With the Hivebusters DLC, I loved it so much I wanted to see where the characters went from there, and what do you know, there's comics of them, of which I only found out about because I searched the Hivebusters DLC on the internet. Before that, I didn't even know there were comics of it. I thought they just made it up for the DLC. Gears 4 and 5 have background material, but not once playing through do I feel an urge to go read further about what these characters get up to off screen. But okay, if you made it this far far in this feature-length video, then I really appreciate you. And if you are still here, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you'll know when the next video drops. I think next we'll be going over Gears Tactics, as I've been playing that game recently, and I may do a video on Gears Ultimate Edition, but I'm not sure there's much to say for that game. And after that, who knows what we'll talk about next. Maybe it'll be Halo, maybe it'll be the Crisis series. I'll decide as I continue working to put these out for you guys, because that's what I do this for, to really put together my thoughts on things I like and to hear others' opinions on them. So again, thank you all so much for watching. Be sure to leave your thoughts down below and subscribe for more to come. Assuming you just watched all my videos, you heard me talk and ramble for about 5 to 6 hours now, you might as well hit the subscribe button at this point. Or don't, it's your choice. But I will see you all in the next one. Peace out.